All right. Good morning, good people. Look at me in a button-up shirt this morning. Button-up shirt. I just saw this video and I thought it was a good intro into talking about a bunch of things. So let's share screen, share, and let's rock and roll and see how the sound is and see what has to say. And I just might play the whole video. Who knows? I might pause it. I probably will pause it and we'll talk about it because it's great. Here we go.
Do you believe in it?
Do I believe that the truth sets you free? Absolutely. It isn't that I believe it even. I know it's true, and I try to live in that knowledge. Do I believe that Christ is the way and the life and that no one comes to the Father but through him? Sure. But I also know what that means.
I also know what that.
You obviously study a lot about the Bible, and I love a lot of the things that you say about it. On your podcast, you have all these, you're digging, you're talking to religious figures, you're discussing the Bible, you're all these things. Yet, and I researched you and I wanted to figure out what you believe. And I couldn't find it. I found that a question that you despise is, do you believe in God? Mm-hmm. And so I'd like to dig in.
All right. First pause. My computer's struggling already because like CW said, I don't have a good setup and I have an old computer. Maybe someday I'll get a new one. Okay. I didn't notice this the first time that I watched it, but even that, I've noticed in researching you, one of the questions that annoys you is, do you believe in God? And so I wanted to find out what you believe. And so I researched you. This is what I would say is there's a tell there. There's the assumption that you can find out what someone believes by researching things that they've said in writing, I'm assuming, or in video. There's a key assumption about belief there. All right, let's keep going. And Peterson will talk about it.
And
see, the thing about God is that God isn't something you believe in. This is the thing. Or you could say that the way we conceptualize belief in the modern world is shallow. To believe in God is to commit your life. That's what the belief is. It isn't the statement, I believe in God. The statement can get in the way. It does all the time. It says in the Gospels, Christ himself says, not everyone who says, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven. Just because you say you believe something, it's like people say all the time that they're Christians. I'm a believing Christian. It's like, that's hard there, buddy. That's the most difficult possible commitment by definition. It's because it's the hoisting of the cross, right? Really, you're going to commit to that, are you? So here's what you're committing to. Painful, unjust death, accompanied by betrayal, the perfidy of the mob, and the dominion of the tyrant. And you're going to welcome that. And that's not all, because Christ harrows hell. That's not all. That's just where it starts. Full confrontation with malevolence. You're going to commit to that, are you? Because that's what you're doing.
What do you mean you're going to commit to that? You mean you're going to commit to believe that he went, that Christ
no, you're going to do it.
That you're going to do it.
In your own life. That's what Christ called.
So there you go. Are you going to commit to believe that Jesus did it? Or that you... Oh, no, you're going to commit to that. You're going to do it in your own life. And he'll talk about faith and works stuff too here in that conflation. But Peterson understands this point very well, and I agree with him. All right, keep onward.
Calls upon people to do. That's the imitation of Christ that's at the core of a genuine Christian commitment. Now, people will say, you can't get to heaven by works alone, and that's true. That's not what I mean. That's not the point here. The point is that the belief is a commitment to a pattern. The pattern is full voluntary confrontation. Full naked, crucified voluntary confrontation. Accepted in good faith, with joy, and courageously. Bring it on. Military people understand this. Or at least an aspect of it, right? Because they put their lives on the line.
He'll talk about
not
this
just their
too, Mark.
lives, their souls. And so it's a hell of a thing to ask of people. Christianity is not a comfort. Look, Christ says his burden is light. And what does that mean? It means that there's really nothing that can provide abundance and security like the truth. So that's the lightness part of it. But the cross part of it is you have to decide not to shrink away from anything. You don't get to live in a pumpkin shell anymore. That's the people. Christ comes back at the end of time, and he doesn't reserve his wrath for the sinners. He reserves his wrath for people who sit on the fence. And, people who want a normal, secure life. I'm not pillaring that. I'd rather have them than the radicals and the revolutionaries. But that's not what a human being is. Like we're bounders over the stormy ocean, We're built for a life of radical harness and adventure. We're built for the maximum sacrifice. That's what it means to believe, to accept that. No holds barred. Away the hell we go. And so people say they're believing Christians. It's like, really? Really? You dare say that? You have no idea what you're saying. Because it's a total commitment. It's a total commitment to confront and ride out the worst. Well, I'll give you an example. So in the story of Exodus, the Israelites are lost in the desert. They're lost for like 45 years. And they're always whining and bitching and complaining and acting like, privileged slaves and pining for the tyranny and hoping for the golden calf and complaining that the heavenly food they have to eat isn't good enough because there's not enough variety. It's like they're really quite contemptible. And near the end of their voyage to the promised land, really on the border, they run out of water again. And they go to Moses. They get all bitchy about it. And they're faithless and complaining. And God gets sick of them again. And he sends a bunch of poisonous serpents in to bite them. And you might think, well, no good God would do that. It's like, you're not paying attention to the story. What's the story? If you're lost and faithless and then you get whiny and resentful, it's just going to make it worse. And so you're in the desert and you don't have enough to drink, and there's all sorts of stupid things you can do that bring the snakes forward. And so that's what happens, is that it's already bad and they make it worse. So now there's all these poisonous snakes biting them. And they get tired of it eventually. And they go to Moses and they say, well, we know that you can talk to God. And so do you want to see if he'll call off the snakes? And Moses goes and has a chat with God. And God says basically that he's pretty sick and tired of the Israelites. And he thinks that some more snakes might be just the thing they need. But he decides that maybe he'll listen to Moses because Moses has, stored up a certain amount of goodwill. And so God says to Moses, cast a serpent in bronze and put it on a bronze pole and put it in the midst of the Israelites so they can all look on it. And if they look at it, then the poison won't affect them. He doesn't get rid of the snakes. He calls upon the Israelites to face what they're avoiding, to face what's poisoning them. And because of that, they become stronger. That's life, man. And so Christ says later, much later, that he has to be lifted up like the snake in the desert, which is a very strange thing for anyone to say. And the Israelites have to look on what they're terrified of in order to obtain resilience. That's the healing motif. That snake on the staff is the symbol of Asclepius. It's the symbol that physicians still use now to represent their healing enterprise. A little of what poisons you makes you stronger. That's the theory, right? And that's the theory of voluntary confrontation. Well, Christ, the crucifix is the same image except expanded. It's like all possible snakes. It's all the things that could happen to you if the worst possible things happen to you all at once. And the Christian calling is to welcome that. Right? To become the sort of person who could welcome that. Job, for example, in the story of Job, Job is tortured by Satan himself. Job's a good man, and God's bragging about him in heaven. But how good he is, and Satan comes along and says, I don't think he's that good. And God says, what do you mean? And Satan says, he's just privileged. Things are going well for him, and so he's good. Let me at him for a while, and we'll see if he's good. And God says, I think he's good. Do your worst. And so Job is, all his enterprises collapse, his servants all die, his wealth is demolished. He ends up extremely ill with a disfiguring disease. He's sitting in the ashes, demolished. His wife tells him that all that's left for him is to shake his fist at God and die. And then his friends come and tell him that it's all his fault. And so that's Job. And what does Job do? Job says, these terrible things have happened to me, but that's not because of some central flaw in me. He maintains his faith in his integral humanity, and he refuses to lose faith in God. And it's kind of perverse in a way, because Job has every bloody reason to shake his fist at God and die, which is what his wife tells him to do. And Job's insistence is, no matter what happens to you, you're called upon to maintain faith and move forward. And that's expanded in the crucifixion story.
So with all your studies that you've done in the Bible, and I'm asking you because you have immersed yourself in it, and you've studied it for so long. Do you believe in it?
Well, I believe in it in the way that we just described. Do I believe that the truth sets you free? Absolutely. It isn't that I believe it even. I know it's true.
Jung.
I know it's true, and I try to live in that knowledge. It's very difficult to only think or say things that are true, but you can practice it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a great relief. Well, as you pointed out, you don't have to keep track of anything. That's just that in and of itself is
it's freeing.
That's for sure. That's for sure.
Freeing.
Do I believe that Christ is the way and the life, and that no one comes to the Father but through him? Sure. But I also know what that means. It means that, imagine that you want to have the Spirit of the Almighty dwell within you, say, in this Old Testament manner. How do you do that? By taking the burden of life on yourself voluntarily. Why? Because that causes the best within you to make itself manifest. You know that. Look, why did you push yourself on the military front? Why did you go become a Navy SEAL? That's a ridiculous thing to do, right? They just torture you to death in the water. Why'd you do it?
Because I wanted to serve my country in the highest capacity possible.
Okay, so why did you think that?
Okay, I want to do a quick pause at this part, because I think where Peterson goes with this is good. But it's like, I don't know. This Shawn Ryan guy, I've seen some of his videos and I like him, but he's not a I don't know. I would say he's not used to thinking deeply about things, which is why like even after everything Peter just said about what he's saying, what do you believe in God? And then Shawn Ryan is just like, okay, but do you believe in God? He's still stuck in like identitarian self-identifying belief, or like self-identifying two ideas and propositions as belief, which is what Peterson has just explained is such a small part of the totality of belief, which is committing one's whole being to a pattern of existence, to a pattern, which is voluntary self-sacrifice, taking up your cross for truth, for good, for love, for beauty. and Mandy's talking about, like, he's not really saying, he's not talking about love a lot, but part of that is because Jordan Peterson is Canadian, downstream of like Protestant, Puritans, pietists, POS theology. Love is not super integrated in that. It's just like a brutal nose to the grindstone, suffering kind of just gospel of just try harder. So that's part of what I want to say. But then also, it's funny. I'll rewind it and play it again a little bit when I start playing it again. But Peterson goes like, let's illustrate this. Let's illustrate this in your own life. Why did you become a Navy SEAL? And then Shawn, God bless him, and he'll get there eventually. But he gives a Sunday school answer. Because I wanted to serve my country in the highest way that I knew how. That's the equivalent of like, why are you going to heaven? Jesus. It's the same thing. But part of that is like, you can't, it almost feels like St. Paul's like, whoa, you're still needing milk. You should be moving on to solid food. You're still a baby. Like, why do we need to return to the elementary teachings? Like, come on, let's go eat some solid food. I mean, here's the thing, Mitch. Sunday school answers aren't wrong, but if you're stuck in regurgitative knowing, if you're just repeating rote answers, you have not yet known as you are. You do not yet know as you are known. You do not. I mean, even classic school, grammar, logic, rhetoric, poetic. You need to move on to the poetic. Start using your own words. That's a classic thing of education. If you're just repeating answers, if you repeat answers in writing, it's plagiarism. If you just repeat answers in speaking, people say, no, put it into your own words. Why do they say that? Because it's an essential part of learning. All right, let's go back to the video.
You believed that there was a highest capacity. Burden of life on yourself voluntarily. Why? Because that causes the best within you to make itself manifest. You know that. Look, why did you push yourself on the military front? Why did you go become a Navy SEAL? That's a ridiculous thing to do, right? They just torture you to death in the water. Why'd you do it?
Because I wanted to serve my country in the highest capacity possible.
Okay, so why did you think that? So you believed that there was a highest capacity.
Yes.
Right. So that was an element of faith. And so personally, you put yourself through this brutal transformative process. How did that change you?
In a lot of ways, it changed me. We've been talking about this off and on. There was a lot of pride involved. And when I graduated from that, I never felt more pride. Another reason I did it was I always felt that I had fallen short in childhood, and I wanted my parents to have something to be proud of.
Okay, so let's separate pride from accomplishment.
Okay.
Right, because you could see pride would be unwarranted pride in your accomplishment, but that doesn't mean that there's no such thing as accomplishment. Okay, so do you feel that you accomplished something real when you went through the Navy SEAL training program?
Absolutely.
Okay, why was it real?
Because why was it real? It was the hardest thing that I've done.
Right.
Why was it real? Peterson's
That's
like,
right.
You get it. You got it.
Yeah. Was it meaningful?
Absolutely.
Was it transformative?
Yes.
And it was the hardest thing you'd ever done. Okay, well, that's the pathway. The pathway to what's most real is through the hardest things that you can do.
No matter where you're watching Shawn Ryan show from, if you get anything out of this,
stab. All right, T-Grog. First thing I want to address you, T-Grog. Why was it real? That's a legitimate question. You assume it's not a profound question because you have a lot of assumptions. Because there's many people who have reached out to you. I know Neil has. I know Tyler has. Who else in the comments has reached out to T-Grog for a conversation? Many, many people. This is what I would say to you, buddy. You could have a conversation on what is real. That's what I suggest. Have a conversation with maybe Neil and Tyler. I can help you set it up. I'll set it all up. I will connect all you guys. I'll get all your emails and it would be fantastic. It would be a huge hitter. It would be a big hit in TLC for you guys to have a conversation. And you can have a conversation on what is real. I think that'd be a fantastic conversation. I'd watch. Science tells us what is real. All right. Beat that dead horse, buddy. Beat that horse and beat that drum. Have a longer conversation. This is what I would say to you. Going through all your comments on here, buddy, I'll just be honest with you. And this isn't, I don't think this is virtuous. This is a character flaw on my part. You're annoying. All your comments in here are annoying because you're just doing the same thing. You're not participating in dialogos. You're not participating in the conversation. You're just trotting. You're you're the atheist equivalent of an evangelical. You have memorized rote answers that you think are profound, or you'll quote patristics or verses at people as proof texting them, and it's unbecoming, I guess is one way to say it. And so if you want to have a real conversation and enter into genuine dialogos and participation in the spirit of TLC, doesn't mean you have to agree with people, doesn't mean you have to accept Jesus as your personal Lord and Savior, but stop using exclusively text-based comments to cast stones, because you're a cynic. You're not even a genuine skeptic. You're a cynic. I don't think you're open to the truth outside the truth you currently apprehend. I don't even know that I don't know. I don't want to judge you, but I think it's highly probable that you don't even believe the things you're saying. All right. Ending of that. My rant on T-Grog. Yeah, dialogos is a made-up word. Again, because you have no interest in trying to learn and understand anything of what I'm saying and have further understanding. You just want to disparage it and be a cynic. All right. And I'm not trying to throw all the evangelicals under the bus, but this is something I do want to talk about because it's related to all this. And it's connected to, I do want to try to connect this a little bit. I'm not going to stay very long here. So unless Sherry or Lance or somebody else shows up or people come on, I'll put up the link in a little bit. They can just carry on until they want to leave and it will close on its own, but because I have other stuff to do. But so yesterday in the stream, it was a good stream. If you're interested in TLC, I would check it out. It's 4 hours. There's some parts that you could check out. I would mainly check out the parts because this is the further up and further in evolution and growth that we have. About Grog, I can't even look at your comments. You're so distracting. This is the thing, is I want to talk about this. I don't want to always get caught up in your pet project, which is disabusing us all of our whatever you think in your new atheism understanding of religion is. All right. In yesterday's stream, Chad came in with, and it was a bit of a kerfuffle, but it was good. It was a good thing. And I'm ultimately glad it happened. And I've spoken with Chad multiple times about it. Some yesterday, some through messages, a couple phone calls. And I think we're on the same page. And he used an illustration to help me try to understand what he was saying yesterday. And I'll bring it back to this JBP, do you believe in God conversation and what that means. Because what annoyed Chad yesterday in the conversation is related to some frustrations that my boy Sam Tiedemann has had of Transfigured and recently about, let's say, Orthodox Triumphalism online and even in TLC, of people just always talking about orthodoxy. Now, there's a little bit of nuance here. I think I know what Chad is saying, and I think it's legitimate. This is the problem with naming a little bit, and this is a very Owen Barfield idea, is that in naming something, you can, there's a danger in not saving the appearances. The name, because of the way that human consciousness and language and the magic of grammar and spelling and language works, is that you can disassociate the name from the being, from the essence of a thing. Yeah, this is streaming on Grail Country and My Country and X, which I don't check at all. Apparently, I have a bunch of notifications there because I don't want to really participate on X. But Chad was saying part of the frustration with Orthodoxy is just hot right now. People are very interested in Orthodoxy because of online stuff, which comes with tons of complications. This is an ongoing thing for me, and I was telling Chad, listen, I'm just as concerned about it. I'm concerned from the inside because I am Orthodox. I converted, was baptized, chrismated, participate in a local Orthodox church. And so the whole Ortho Bro movement and everybody being so hot on Orthodoxy is a concern for me, because one of my key beliefs is that personal knowing is the only proper kind of knowing, and personal knowing is the integration and the unity of all the 4 P's: procedural, propositional, perspectival, procedural. Did I say them all? Participatory, whatever. The 4 P's, the integration of them is the personal. When all of those things are together and in harmony, including the propositional, I'm not anti-propositional, that is proper personal knowing. 1 Corinthians 8, knowing as you are known. It's when you fully save the appearances. So when your naming and your vision is integrated properly into your imagination and manifests in a properly oriented being in the world, in the kind of stuff that Jordan Peterson is talking about, voluntary self-sacrifice out of love for your true self, your white stone self, who is the unity of all the relationships of what you are outside and inside of time. That you only get proper personal knowing through initiation. Again, you can't. So to go into the Shawn Ryan conversation, to know what Jordan Peterson believes, you're not just going to get that through propositional. You're not going to do that just in a disembodied, despirited breath analysis of the words that he has said or written, because that's too unifocal. That's not the fullness of Jordan Peterson's life, because the fullness of Jordan Peterson's life is his personal knowledge that he has through his initiation, which you're only going to know through a relationship with him, because you can only analyze the propositional of what he said. You could through YouTube and podcasts and observing him in this medium, you could perhaps get an idea of some aspects of his procedural and his participatory, maybe, but like, you're not going to get the whole thing. You just can't. It's too big. It's too big to get through what he really knows, because in order to properly know what someone thinks, you have to be initiated with them, which requires relationship. It requires time. It requires training in them, not just in their words, abstracted and divorced from their being, from their essence. And a lot of that is what Jordan Peterson is talking about in this thing, is like, you can't understand if I believe in God by just what I say, because because many will come to me and say, Lord, Lord, didn't we blah, 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 blah. And I will say, depart from me, I never knew you. And who are those who are really believers? It's not the fence sitters. It's the people who act as if they believe in God, which is a terrifying prospect. Mark said that earlier. The same thing as Jordan Peterson. It's a terrifying thing to say that you're a Christian, because what does that mean? Well, it means that you're going to follow in the pattern of Christ. Doesn't look fun. It sure doesn't look fun. Does it look good? Does it look truth? Does it look like it's full of love? Does it look like it's beautiful? Yeah, but it's terrifyingly beautiful. Because it's going to require your self-sacrifice. You can't just, life is not tried, it is merely survived if you're standing outside the fire, Garth Brooks. If you want to that's for you, Clint, if you're here. You maybe, I don't know if you like Garth. I do like Garth. I grew up in that era. But if you cannot, it's like learning to swim outside the pool. You're like, well, I've read a lot of manuals and I've heard a lot of people talk about swimming, but you've never gotten in the water. Are you a swimmer? No, you're not a swimmer. You got to swim to be a swimmer. What does it mean to be a Christian? You got a Christ. And this is why you can't divorce faith from works. That's what Peterson was saying. You have to suffer voluntarily out of love for other people. You actually have to die to yourself. You actually have to repent. Not literally, actually. You have to actually do it. Blessed are not just the hearers of the word, but the doers of the word, St. James. And so back to the Chad thing. When people just are saying they're Orthodox, what they can be doing in that, or talking about Orthodoxy incessantly, they can be doing a Jonathan Peugeot pride is the excess of identity. And this is where it clicked for me the best in a way that I think I can talk about it. One of the things that PVK will do that frustrates me is when he says, like, when he's just like, well, of course I just, sit back and trust God on who's going to be saved. I don't feel this compulsion to like talk somebody into the kingdom because I'm a Calvinist. And I'll just say, Paul, that's not Calvinism. That's just called faith. And it's not even Christian faith. It's just broadly faith in God, that God is good, sovereign, providential, in control, that he is all the things that he says he is. And in the end, the God of the earth will do right. It's faith in the goodness of God, even outside of, it's the peace that passes understanding. That's not Calvinism. That's just Christianity. And Chad was saying, when people talk about orthodoxy, they can talk about orthodoxy or anything, fill in the blank. This isn't just about orthodoxy, because, okay, pause. That's another thing I want to talk about after this. Because if you just say, like, that's just Calvinism, what you do is you're absolutizing the label of your self-identity to encompass something that's much larger than what it's meant to encompass. For example, Calvinism isn't broad Christian faith. It's a narrower subset of a system of dogmatic thinking that is one of the intellectual traditions within Christian tradition, which is, again, not the belief thing. The belief is so much bigger than the propositional. Like, we need to escape propositional tyranny, not disregard or not care about propositions, because they do matter. They do matter. I will argue them sometimes, but they are not the main thing you should be focusing on. The main thing you should be focusing on is primarily taking the log out of your eye, cleaning your room, telling the truth, or at least not lying, loving God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and loving your neighbor as yourself. The golden rule, treating other people how they want to be treated, or how you would want to be treated. Not insisting on your own way. Love is patient. 1 Corinthians 13. Maybe I should just do a 1 Corinthians 13 or 1 Corinthians Bible study, because I love that book of the Bible. Nice. Presentation is getting sharper. Well, that's good. Thank you, Mitch. So one of the other things I want to touch on is, this is complicated for me because I do think Orthodoxy is the one true church, but not in an exclusive way, because I think of exclusion for inclusion. But my understanding of the church is that, again, I have a podcast or a live stream on what is the church. The church is just out of I think it's 1 Thessalonians 1 or whatever. The church is just what is called into being. It's that line from the liturgy, from my liturgy, sorry, Orthodox, but it's that line which is, who called you out of non-being into being. What is coming, it's hearkening to Genesis, of the Spirit hovering over the deep and calling things out of non-being into being. Let there be light, there's light. You speak and it is. Pure act. That is, that's what the church is. It's what is being called into being, which is a pretty absolutizing, totalizing thing. And the label that I would put on that is the Orthodox Church. Whatever whatever the church of your understanding is, or the religion of your understanding, whether that's the Torah or whatever, fill in the blank. Whatever you think being is, the beatific vision, whatever is true, good, and beautiful, that's being called out of which is moving away from non-being and death and decay into being. I just call that the Orthodox Church. And I'm not going to, but the thing is I'm not going to get so caught up in the ideas and the labels to lose the essence of it. I want to save the appearances. So if that label, again, and this is the thing that Chad is getting mad about or frustrated about, if that label doesn't work for you, fine, get rid of it. It doesn't matter, because it wouldn't do you any good anyhow, because it's not the label that resonates with you, and you can't use anything that doesn't resonate with you. Deep calls to deep. And so I will continue speaking from my experience, because what else am I going to do? But if the labels of my experience don't resonate with you, you can't even use them anyhow. So forget them. They're irrelevant to you. truly irrelevant. And that's the other thing I wanted to say, and then I'm going to open this up, is, what was it? Chad, are you here? He's maybe working. There's one other piece that I wanted to add of my mosaic. I forgot. Okay, I'm going to look at comments and open this up. Grog, I also want to say, if you're still here, buddy, you are, I guess. I like you, dude. I want to engage with you, but I don't want to. Again, it's treating other people how you want to be treated. If I were, and people, here's the thing. I give everyone the grace and the freedom to tell me when I'm being annoying, when I'm being obtuse and blind, and I just keep saying the same things and I'm not listening to the feedback that that other people are giving me. I'm not being a good conversation partner. And then what happens is no one's going to want to talk to you. And that's not good for you, because you need to have, it's like kind of like Jordan Peterson thing of, you need to have this ratio of 4-to-1 positive to negative interactions, between 4-to-1 and 12-to-1. Because if you have fewer than 4-to-1 positive to negative interactions with people, it's too aggressive and combative, and people can't maintain that. It's way too hard. But then if you have a higher ratio than 12-to-1 of positive to negative interactions, there's not enough tension, and people think you're a pushover. They're like, you're not even a person. So what's the point? To have proper dialogos, you got to stay in that sweet spot. And it's something to just try to be aware of. And different people with different ratios of agreeability or agreeableness they're going to struggle on either end of that spectrum. So anyhow, Mark, I'm ready for you, buddy. What do you have to say? You're muted.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I just I think on the regarding the Peterson video and how it related to some of the comments yesterday and the spirit of yesterday, which the only thing, like you said, if you really want to get a feel for the TLC, it was full spectrum yesterday. It was the whole range of the experience. I think is there. And so it's a 4-hour investment, but it could probably, you probably get 80 hours worth of listening crammed into one if you want to feel for the place. In fact, that sociologist should probably watch your stream yesterday.
Oh yeah, what's her name?
Clara.
Yeah. Clara.
Like
Yep.
Clara.
Hey, she's here.
Claire. Watch that stream.
Speak of the devil.
I only have a few minutes, but I really wanted to get this to you, Luke. I've been given, in the last few months, it's been a pretty rough ride physically, but the Lord has given me 3 verses that have stuck with me, and they keep coming back again and again and again. The first one was Luke 22, where Jesus says, Simon, Simon, Satan has desired to take you, to sift you like wheat. But I prayed for you. And when he's in the language in the Greek, of course, if you don't know, is sift you all. So Satan's after the whole group.
Yeah.
And but then he turns to Peter and says, "But I prayed for you, and when you recover, or when you return, strengthen your brothers." That's the first verse.
Okay.
Second verse that came to me during this time was 1 Corinthians 5, where Paul says, "Deliver such a one to Satan, so that his soul might be saved on the day of judgment."
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, when that gets applied, see, you always think that's somebody else. That's that horrible guy who slept with his stepmother. But when the Lord turns it around and says, "This one's for you, buddy,"
yeah,
to do a Petersonism, that's like that hits you in the solar plexus, man. It's just like, oh, that took the wind out of me. Then there is the last one was Romans 14, verse 26, maybe. I'm really bad at recalling the verses. It's the one that came to me for you, Luke, when you were talking about when you threw out feet wanting I guess kind of a prayer request for your direction in your life. And
Okay.
it was, you know, the line that it's that which isn't of faith is sin.
Yeah. Yeah.
Something along those lines. Now, bring it back to TLC. I'm not just going to Bible thump you.
We like the Bible here.
Well, it's very useful.
Yeah.
I'm just going to say it, but I want to say it in a spirit of love. I don't want it to be. I hope to be taken as as a compassionate thing. And Grimm is going through some. I mean, really the hardest stuff you can go through. But there's two ways of looking at what we go through when we go through really hard times. In some ways, I'm going through similar things. Only the death of my loved one is going very slowly. And it's a torturous thing to watch. Our minds manifest our reality in many ways. Jesus with at the miracle at Cana, the wedding feast. His mind manifested through faith, manifested wine from water. Those were his circumstances in the moment. We can inversely, through our lack of faith, manifest darkness. Grimm has struggled in his interview with Jordan Hall. He could not say to himself he's a follower of Jesus. He could not take the leap of faith and that just simply trust. You're good enough to follow Jesus, Grimm. You're good enough to be a disciple. When someone said, "Oh, you're our Peter," to Chad, I'm not one of those fucking guys. That quote, right? I'm sorry if I'm yelling. I apologize.
I yell often. My wife is often like,
no, man. You can see it two ways. I think that was a good comment. I definitely see Chad as a Peter in the TLC. We fulfill these roles. Jesus even said as much when he talked about John the Baptist. You've seen Elijah. It was John the Baptist, and you rejected him.
yeah.
We're fulfilling, we're repeating these motifs again through our lives, and it's nothing new under the sun. We're doing it all over again. And what I worry about when take this very lightly, when these spirits of darkness manifest within our midst, and we produce them. I've done it many times. And when I see it in others, it's easier to see it in others when I see it myself. Oh, it's always in retrospect. I said, oh, fuck,
Yeah.
When I see it in myself. It's easier to say, oh, okay, pray, It's time to spend more time in scripture, spend more time in quietness, spend more time with good friends. This isn't hell, folks. I know Grimm's in hell now, but this isn't hell, and he isn't in hell. And he isn't being punished for something. Because implicit in hell is the idea that you're being punished you're there for a reason. Right? No. If anything, you're here to be redeemed. That would be back to the Clouser interview that Paul just did. The whole story is redemption, start to finish. You're born to be redeemed. You're born to be born again. Get into that. Now, that's just talk. You're going to have to somehow eat and digest any of that. If it's of use, if it's food for you, good. Him who has ears, great. But I don't want the little ones in the group to feel to be discouraged, to be brought down, to have their faith weakened because the leadership is having a moment. Leaderships always have moments. They come, they go. Let them have their moment. It's going to settle. Trust in the Lord. Stay in the scripture. Try to learn how to pray. And lean on good friends. That's all I got for you, Luke. But thank you. And I think again, that's the problem with JBP is that he keeps his eyes on the difficulty, on the Jesus is saying walk on water, and it's the wind and the waves.
Yeah.
Down we go. And that's why Peterson can't take the leap. It's a big commitment. Just jump. It's sometimes.
I don't know that with Peter. No, you're good. You're good. I don't know with Peterson if it's more. I think he's being very careful with his words and strategic in what he says. I don't know that he hasn't taken that leap because again, it's all that. What does it mean to take that leap? He's very clear that he acts like he said explicitly in that video. Do I believe Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life? Yeah, absolutely. I believe all that stuff.
Okay.
And he's like, but I think I know what that means. And it means to act as if, to live it with the whole totality of your life. But to take that label onto yourself, he's like, that's an intense ask. And I think it is. It's an aspirational thing. But these conversations are all complicated because it's, like I often say in the scriptures, if you even want to look at the scriptures, there's you were saved before the foundation of the world. You are being saved. You will be saved. There's all that stuff. All of that's in the scriptures. So people talk about often saints have said, are you a Christian? I aspire to be. You can talk about it in all those ways.
Sure. I understand that. That's fair. And I asked in the comments, I wondered if Peterson's been exposed to Bonhoeffer, cosmic discipleship. And I think, and he certainly, if he hasn't, he's playing with the idea of cheap grace versus the costly stuff. And no way am I saying it's easy, and to be owned by the Lord, we are bond servants of His, or say slaves of Christ. To be a Christian is to be wholly His, and that's a big part of my journey in the last few months. Is that there's just that rope is really short. My leash is short, So I don't have a lot of freedom to move. Now I think other people feel like they can do this and do that. No, for me it's very day to day, and it's a very short leash I'm on. I do not have the freedom to explore polyamory and Jesus, or or some other strange new practice of the 21st century evangelical Christian. No, I'm not going there. But it always comes back to, it's Bob Dylan. You got to serve somebody, and it's going to be Look, you can either be a slave to sin or a slave to Christ, and in Christ there's freedom, and it's that His yoke is easy and His burden is light.
Yes.
All right, I'm done. Thank you,
Mark. Thank you.
God bless you.
I'll be praying for you, thinking of you.
Thank you. Absolutely, you too.
Thanks for your words, buddy.
Thank you.
So, Mitch, I love you. I'm always eager for your thoughts, but I'm more interested in talking to Clara because I've never spoken with her. And she's, you're this mysterious sociologist person studying us. And so I want to know, what do you see in the Petri dish? What do you see in the microscope?
Well, good morning. I'm sorry, Mitch. I wanted to hear what you had to say too. But it's so interesting because I've been listening to you today, Luke, and I thought, oh my goodness, there's so many layers of personalism and what do I think about this? There's so many layers. So for me to there's a lot of anytime I listen to any of you all, I'm thinking wow, there's layers of theology, but philosophy, but wow.
Well, so Lance, I see you there. You can come in anytime you want, buddy. I'm not adding you because I figure you're just hanging out. But so I guess my response to that would be, it's. Do you remember the part where I was talking about initiation, proper knowledge, requires initiation. All those different layers. That's what's so cool about the TLC. It's one of the things that I love about it, and it is a very unique place that I find value in because I guess what I would say it's this medium that has allowed people to. It's not merely just a thought place. Like that's something I've said to a lot of like Nathan Ormond, who's he's a TLC lore person. He grew up as an atheist in England, converted to kind of a more fundamentalist kind of Christianity, and then fell away from that. And now he's studying philosophy. And like, I don't even know where he is right now. CW interviewed him. It was CW's first interview.
Okay, yeah.
And, but he has this long history that I won't get into all the detail with the TLC. And, that's one of the things that I first said to him is I said, this isn't predominantly a idea space. It's a person space. And so we talk about a lot of ideas, and it's one of the areas. It's why I've always said the PVK is the center of the corner, not Peugeot, not Peterson, not Vervaeke, because PVK did the randos. PVK intuitively has always centered this around people. And we talk about a lot of ideas. We talk about philosophy. We talk about theology. But fundamentally here, it's about knowing and loving people, which I actually think is the proper way to know anything.
Yeah.
And that's why I love this space. And but all that requires time and initiation. That's kind of why it's the steep slope thing.
Oh yeah.
Is because, and Mitch knows this. Mitch and I have talked a long time, and I've heard lots of people say this about me. A lot of people are like, my wife still, I mean, we've been together over 20 years. She still has no idea what I'm talking about. Like it's gonna, I'm weird, obviously, but you're definitely not going to have any idea of what I'm talking about if you have no initiation. You can't. It's kind of like what that guy was trying to do with Peterson. Like I tried to find out what you believe. You can't do that.
Yeah. No, I felt that like existentially. I was like, I talked to lots of people about like, what do you believe? And I realized that belief is not the question. It's where people are in terms of all these other things in their lives, all of the other stories that kind of intersect with their actions. So I thought, you know what? I show your face, Clara. You need to get to know these people. That's
Now you're studying. You're studying. That's good.
I don't like this sort of I'm studying you kind of dynamic. I
know what you mean.
I would hope that we could have a conversation.
But to know anyone, like for what your project is or your work or whatever, that's kind of I guess that would be what I'm positing though, is like in order to know anything properly, you have to know it in the fullness of all these dynamics personally, which is the integration of all those P's, of which one is the propositional. But that's one of the problems with modernity and the way that most people approach how they know things, their epistemology or whatever, is they just hyper focus on the propositional.
Yeah.
Which is not the way to know things.
Yeah. I agree with this. And so that's why I sort of am asking questions in this space and coming to this space, because I think it's way bigger than just what any one person thinks.
Heck yeah. Amen. Mitch, Lance, what up, my friends? Also, Mitch, I have a buddy who I spoke with privately a little who really, we maybe just need to have a different conversation or a live stream about it, but he was really wanting to tap into your advocacy for proselytizing. He really wants to know why you feel that way and just have you flesh that out. And I would love to do that with you sometime. I don't know that today's the day, but it's kind of its own conversation.
Yeah, probably so. But it has to do with something I was fixating on from earlier, which was you were right to defer to Claire, because I fixate on something and then I'll hop on here and want to talk about it, and then 30 minutes later I'm like, oh yeah, this is the thing I was thinking about. But it's good to think about more big picture. But the thing I was fixating on was you saying that you like to have this openness to let people tell you when they are being when you're being annoying. And I thought yesterday, the reason that I got on yesterday was because I felt like maybe I'd offended you a little, and you had said something that caught my attention, which was like, you engaged with what I said, and then you said like, I actually, and maybe something Chad had said too, or more bothered relationally by what you said than by the fact that it kind of contradicts, my position in some way. And I have this problem lately, and I mean, the thing that I ended up most interested in yesterday was, Chad's leveling some kind of critique, and then my feeling being that it was kind of spun in a positive light, or in that way, not seriously engaged. But we're still kind of, nobody wants to feel bad, and nobody wants to. We want to have this unity and be getting along with one another. But as we kind of stuck having to disagree with each other sometimes, and sometimes it's just fun. Like, it's just fun to disagree, and it's like a game. But sometimes when it's something that's really a part of us, or that means so much to us, then it takes on a different flavor. And me and Jason have this problem a lot lately, where I realize, like, I'll say something that will bother him. It will bother him, and then I'll think, why is he getting bothered by this? That's not fair. And then I realize, like, well, actually, I kind of need to trust him enough to let him be bothered by it, and not think that that's going to terminate our friendship. So there's this trust that has to keep going back and forth between each other. And I think that, not trying to get into it, but I think it does relate to the proselytizing thing, is that when you're trying to engage someone and trying to bring them over to your way of seeing things, it can't just be because you've made the thing you're trying to win them towards the thing, but that it's something that we have to always be conspiring for one another's well-being. And anyways, that was a big spiel, but
No, that's good. I think there can be a well, first off, I would say I actually love that about you a lot, Mitch, in that we've developed when I was first getting to know you, whatever it is, you would challenge me on things, and because we're coming at things from different places in a way where that's always frustrating. It's so much easier to just be constantly affirmed and to be agreed with. That's super easy. But
and to affirm, like, I always want to just have a temptation to, like, I'm just gonna affirm this and move on, because things are so oiled up right now. It's nice.
Yes. So I would say, but what's been good about our relationship and what I enjoy about you is we've cultivated enough of a relationship where I think largely I trust you. So even when you're pushing back, I know that you're doing it for the good. And even if this is part of the conversation I had with Chad, because I can have the tendency, because of I don't know what it is. Childhood trauma or instability in my house. My family's full of neurotics, and so and they're great and I love them. But like, part of that with me growing up was I don't know, call it whatever you want. I don't know what I am. It's like a highly sensitive person, big time empath. And so when things are off, when relationship is stressed, it makes me very uncomfortable. Like, I'm kind of like Jordan Peterson that way, in which I hate conflict, but I also feel it immediately and very intensely. And I can't just ignore it or push under the rug. Like, I need to deal with it, which makes it look almost like I'm confrontational, but I hate it.
Well, I guess, does it make people feel like it makes people, if people you don't want people to feel like they just need to double back on everything they were doing, because I think, they have an empathy for you too. So I don't know. I see you course correct a lot and say, look, I get upset about that in the moment, but you do want to welcome, disagreement. And so maybe that's just all there is to it. I don't know if there's another way to do that better than to just course correct out loud.
Yeah, I'm trying to, in general, it's kind of my natural temperament, but I'm just trying to open the curtain. There's nothing veiled. I want you to let people in on all the internal processes, and there's positives and negatives about that. It's not necessarily a better thing. But so even like with Chad, though, that's what I was telling him on the phone, is that Chad and I have definitely cultivated enough of a relationship where And this is what I try to do in my own personal practice is I really try to put my money where my mouth is, in that I believe that God is always speaking and teaching if you have eyes and ears to hear. That's what I mean by everything's a gift if you receive it as a gift. Or like even the Chinese farmer thing. So like when Chad gets mad in the stream and is coming after people and talking about orthodoxy and fired up or whatever, is that a good or a bad thing? I try to not judge that, in that like I even know and have an emotional response to that, which is trying to control your passions, I think. And then just say, even if Chad isn't saying things as well as he could or anything, I know that Chad loves me. And so what is going on here? I think he's seeing something. Like when Sam or Chad gets annoyed at the Orthodox thing, I think they're seeing something real, even if they don't know how to express that or talk about it well. And so I want to pay attention to that, because my impulse would always to be, I don't know, I hate it. This isn't actually my impulse, is to go the tribal route of just like, they're against orthodoxy, I'm orthodoxy, and so me mad. Like, to me, that's like, I don't know, get more enlightened or something, like if that's your impulse.
If I
Jeremy.
may, as the guy who originally triggered Sam, I wanted to come here and first of all apologize, because I may be guilty of orthobroing, but I wanted to contextualize it a little bit to try to explain, but I don't want to be orthobro guy. Like, I don't feel that way at all. I feel like I've been part of this for a long time. Like, I watched Paul's first video talking about Jordan Peterson, right? Like, I've been around the circle for a while, and I respect Sam a lot. Like, he has forgotten more than I'll ever know. I'm a big fan of Sam.
Okay.
But I want to contextualize where I'm coming from just personally, and it may help flesh out a little bit of why I speak the way I do. I came from a Mormon background, which, looking back now, is hard to even understand as how I called myself a Christian because of their theology. Like, it's just very different. And I won't go down that road because I don't want to do an anti-Mormon thing. But I came from that experience, which is a very American religion, and it's a very materialist religion, and it's a very, I know all the word, I know the baggage of this, but it's a very literalist religion. Like, they see everything as history, and the Bible is history, and the Book of Mormon is a literal. I mean, it used to use that word in the introduction of the Book of Mormon. This is a literal history of the peoples of ancient America continent, right? So when I got older, those claims started falling apart in my hands. Those claims to historicity just didn't stand up to scrutiny. And then, and also I was taken in by the Gnostic messaging of The Matrix, that movie. Like, I saw that movie 7 times in the theater. Like, I was completely enamored, and went down the Gnostic road, and then got involved in Eastern religion with Taoism and Buddhism. And then I went into New Age, and then that got deconstructed into me being a new atheist for a long time. So I don't have an experience of, like, I mean, I went to a Baptist church a few times with my stepmom when I was a kid. I went to a Catholic church a few times with a girl that I was dating when I was in high school. That was most of my experience of quote unquote Christianity was through Mormonism. So when I come to Orthodoxy, it's so far on the opposite end of the spectrum. Like, I left Mormonism because I was looking for mysticism. I could see the need for monasteries. Because of my exposure to Eastern religion, I could see the need and the benefit of monasteries, and Mormonism had nothing like that on offer. They were just like, what are you talking about? And I walked away because I was looking for mysticism. Later in my life, because of a bunch of life trauma and horrific behavior, I ended up in a very dark place, and that's when I started hearing Jordan Peterson talking about the Bible in a way I'd never heard before, which led to the Jonathan Peugeot way of seeing the world, of being exposed to the symbolic worldview. I called Paul Vanderklay in a panic as my materialist worldview was falling apart, and the symbolic worldview starting to come and make more sense, and I thought I was going crazy, honestly. So, like, T. Grogan doesn't...
Grog, do you hear that? He thought he was going crazy.
Think he's throwing new stuff at us, and that's already, like, I already walked through that field and got to the other side of it, right? And I'm not hearing anything new. I understand all of his criticisms. He just can't see what we're pointing at, and I understand the blindness.
Which sounds stupid and And
I don't,
proud
and I don't mean condescendingly. I don't
Right,
mean that
right.
in a condescending
Yeah,
way. I'm
I
just
don't
saying
think you do.
he literally can't see what we're talking about. He
Right.
doesn't have any idea for what we're pointing at.
Yeah.
And I understand that, and I've been in that mindset. And like I said, when it started falling apart, I felt like I was going crazy. But when I speak about orthodoxy, I am speaking about Christianity, but my only exposure and experience of Christianity is through orthodoxy. So I couch it in the terms of this is my Orthodox experience, but I can also say it's my Christian experience, because for me they're the same. I don't have a way of differentiating. I don't know what it's like to be a Unitarian. I don't know what it's like to be even a confessional Trinitarian, or even like I've been to some evangelical churches. I've experienced the mega church thing, and that just never appealed to me. It was not what I was not looking for. I was not looking for Gold's Gym. I was looking for CrossFit. And even when I got to CrossFit, I was like, these guys are weak. I know that's weird to say now that I'm fat, but I'm just saying, like, I was always looking for the harder way. I wanted the full thing. I wanted all in. I wanted what Jordan Peterson was talking about. And orthodoxy was the only place I found it. Other people find it other places. Glory to God. I don't care.
Right.
But for me, that's my experience of Christianity.
Well,
so
and
forgive me for sounding like an ortho bro. I don't mean to. It's just that's my only experience of Christianity as I've experienced it in a real and meaningful and deep way.
So to tack on to your point, and then Alan, you may be free to speak or do a Trump impression or make a joke. And Grog,
I want to stay right on this thread because I was involved in the Chad kerfuffle, and then I'm sure we'll get into T-Grog and other stuff. So I also reached out to Chad. I was super busy, but one of the things that when I came back on, I was taking my wife to a medical appointment. Of course, it was hot and heavy, but I reached out to Chad because I made the comment of look at the log in your own eye sort of thing. I'm like, I shouldn't sell that to anybody publicly. Like, again, that's a comment like he and I would have had offline, but like to add that little bit of color, like I realized when I was looking at my own actions and I had to apologize for him. I'm like, that's a one-on-one comment, right? And the thing that I would share is I spent a lot of time thinking about it, and I was looking at myself too, because I try to bend over backward. Anybody who's spent any time listening to me for any significant amount of time kind of knows where my heart is on that. Like I say things over and over about realizing people aren't going to leave their context, and I think most people shouldn't in some respects. But like Luke, I was thinking, what was all this stuff? Because like when I watch Christians channel, there's lots of, like, you look at all these other channels, not everyone's talking about orthodoxy, but Luke, this is your live stream. Like you're the only one who's really doing, I mean, Jacob has it going on, but you're the one who's doing the most live streams where people are joining in. And your life that you're experiencing, what you talk about is your life, right? Like you have all these things in context, you're reading about things, you're thinking about things, and you're experiencing things in orthodoxy. So of course, like there's gonna be that flair here. And for me, like the one thing that I have is because I'm so immersed in this right now, when I start sharing things or talking about things right now, I can't help but share it through the eyes of Orthodox practices and things like that, right? Because that's just part of what I'm living through and experiencing and kind of dealing with right now. And so the other thing I thought about though for myself is that I have a channel. I've never done anything, and I don't care who would watch it. But I do want to have a place where I can talk about orthodoxy and not have to like worry about stepping on people's toes in it. No, I mean that, like not because I get this. This is a place for other conversations or whatever. And I'm like, you know what? There can be a place where this is the place where we hash things out.
Yeah.
The old Protestant versus Orthodox. I get that. People are tired of that argument because sometimes people get there. So I do want to have a place where I can feel comfortable to just talk about it, right, and not have to worry about why are you talking about this. Well, because it's the most important aspect, one of the most important aspects of my life.
Lance, if I can jump into that one point, because this is what I was going to say when Jeremy was done, is that, and I had this conversation with Chad. This is the whole conversation with metamodernity and perennialism and exclusion and inclusion, because here, if again, there is no knowledge apart from initiation. And so everyone has an embodied, lived life with various initiations that are part of who they are. It's part of their relationship. It's part of their person. It's necessarily part of how and what they know. You cannot divorce that from yourself. But yet at the same time, so even like if Chad, I don't think he wants to do this, wanted to theoretically exclude anybody talking about their denominational affiliation and just talk about the God of their own understanding, that becomes an all-encompassing exclusion.
Right, it is, right, yeah.
Which you can't do that either. And Chad's going to come in and speak for himself, and that's fantastic. So what I would argue for is what I've always called iconic thinking, which is everybody has to talk about the labels that make them up, whether it's scientific, physicalist, atheist, whether it's former Mormon who's now Orthodox, who went through a new atheism phase, whether it's, funny Trump impersonator or whatever. You have to save the appearances. So like, this is what I would argue is everybody has to talk about their labels and their initiations, but save the appearances. Look through that. Don't conflate the name, because you can divorce the name from the essence of the thing, from the reality. I want this to be a space where we can do that, because everywhere else is this place where you can't do that.
Well, what we've seen, if you've been around here long enough, there's been dust-ups amongst many of us for a period of time. And because we're in a relationship, we figure it out. We maybe find some understanding of the other person, or we agree to disagree. And so I'm glad, hey, Chad, now that you joined on, I know that I texted you today. I want to publicly apologize for basically saying you need to look at yourself if it's triggering you. That was totally out of bounds, bro, to say that publicly. And I want to apologize for that yesterday.
Well, thanks, man. It is what it is. It's not a big deal. Hey, everybody, I'm Chad. I'm an alcoholic and Protestant Lutheran husband who really likes spaghetti. And
Keep going.
Sleep Token is pretty great. And
what are you
Why
against?
Why are we always talking about Sleep Token around here, guys?
See, I'm just gonna keep doing it. How's it going, Mr. T-Grog, Mr. Tim?
Just living the dream.
Tim,
man.
are you willing to have personal, recorded or unrecorded conversations with some of these people?
Sure, I have no look. I'm interested in the truth. Okay,
right? We know. I
am interested in what the best approximation of what is true.
Yes.
I have changed
my mind. Well, that's orthodoxy,
bro. On various things. Well, I would say that that's your take on orthodoxy. But
in light of
so I'm very comfortable in my worldview. Okay, now it's not comfortable in the sense that I'm a finite mortal living on a teeny little planet in a great big universe, and I'm mortal and I'm going to die, and everybody I know is going to die. That's very uncomfortable. But I see nothing in evidence that is not the case. So the best thing is comport yourself to the facts. Comport yourself to the facts, no matter how grim they are. If they're grim, then they're grim. That's it.
Grim would be fully on board with that. Grim is the facts. What I would suggest, this conversation about what is facts, what is real, what is evidence, I propose you have that conversation with Tyler. It would be great to be recorded, because I would love to watch it.
I agree.
Who's Tyler?
That'd be great.
Well, I would connect you. He's the one you spoke to once where said, I will have a conversation about anything that you want to talk about anytime. Yeah. Long, dark hair. So will you reach out to me via email, and then I'll connect you? That'd be great.
And they can, actually, could I get your email through, Luke? Because I want to hear your story. I don't give a shit about all that other stuff.
Yeah, both of those are good things.
Rando with Chad, and then a conversation about truth. Bingo, let's do it.
Anyways.
I'm giving you my email now, one of them.
Nice.
Perfect. Thank you, buddy. Hopefully not. Yeah, so. Hopefully the one you give to people that you don't trust quite as much. Don't give me the really.
Well, that's right. Exactly.
We could talk about
just
way
when you
more
thought you were
important
out,
shit,
T-Grog, they pulled you back in.
Yeah, I think that I operate on the presupposition that most things are bullshit. Most things are false. The truth is difficult to come by. That's why it took us thousands of years to develop scientific method and logic and these other things. And bad thinking is the default mode for humans. So we have to be extremely careful what we latch onto, especially if it makes us feel special, I'm going to live forever. God created the whole world. I was in the mind of God from eternity. Wow. That's why one of the things I object about Calvinism. I was elected, and you're damned. See.
You know what I really love?
See, and so anything that makes you feel like, wow, I'm so great and I'm so special, that is a danger sign to me. Dangerous.
I really love pizza, dude. Like my favorite pizza.
Pizza is good.
There's this place in
Not that
in
pineapple
California.
crap. Not that.
There's a place in California called Round Table Pizza. I used to, when I was a kid, I would stay by my grandma's house, and I remember this one time I had this surgery for this cleft lip, and it was like 12 years old when I got this surgery. And what they did was they took part of my bottom lip and like cut a U shape out, and then flipped it up and around and put it up in my upper lip here, so that I could have a more full lip up there. And they had to keep it connected for like a week so that the skin wouldn't die. It was really fucked up because like you could touch the top lip and the nerves were still connected and you could feel it in the bottom. It was this crazy situation. And they were saying, well, you're going to have to be on a liquid diet because you're not going to be able to eat some food. And I was like, fuck that. I'm not going to do liquid diet, you sons of bitches. So what I ended up doing was my grandma, I love her. I love her so much. She would order Round Table Pizza for me, and there's a pizza that they had called Chicken Garlic Gourmet.
Ooh.
And it is phenomenal. I'd cut that thing into little thin slices and just stuff it in that hole, like out of the side of my lip. Oh man, it's fucking great, dude.
Well, that's synchronicities because it is family movie and pizza night if we don't end up going to the last Friday celebration of Bright Week. But yeah, pizza's good. What style of pizza? New Haven, deep dish,
all the above,
Detroit.
All the above. The thing about Grandma Carolyn and Grandpa David is Grandpa David was more vocal, like you are, Tim, about these kinds of things. He would snuff out my mom's kind of like longings for spiritual connection. He would tell her things like that's just illogical and stupid and stuff, and he never did that to myself or my brother and I, which I'm really grateful for. But they still were really good people, and they did care for us, and so
of course,
all that stuff, all this bullshit that we have to get. I think it's good that we're talking about this kind of stuff, but at the end of the day, guys, we all have to live on this planet together. And
yes.
So honestly, who gives a shit? If God is real and if God is the ultimate authority, then what the fuck does anything that we have to say about it do anything?
Oh, mic drop. Mike dropped himself.
He got hit by lightning.
That's true, but if the God exists and God is actually a personal being, I mean, it would be incumbent if it's a factual claim to try to ascertain if that claim is truth, is correct. So I don't see why anybody would object to that.
if God is like whatever, the unmoved mover that started creation and is outside of things, like the principal cause thing, how could you test that?
Well, I would say this, that in the scriptures, God brings evidence to the table about when he's doing things, aka miracles. He splits seas, he drowns the earth, he heals lepers, Jesus floats off into the envions of the heavens. So miracles to me are evidence. There's no arguments in the Bible. Jesus didn't come in and say, you know, the reason I'm the Messiah is because of this argument. Well, there's an unmoved mover, and the unmoved mover.
Sure, but you just said all these evidences. You just don't think those are real?
No, I don't think. Well, there's not enough. There's not enough
evidence for those evidences.
Well, yeah, if they were, well, as we know from history, and I'm not a historian, but I've read a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
There's miracles all over the place. There's miracles in Greco-Roman religions. There's miracles in Hinduism. There's miracles in Islam. There's
Are
miracles.
those valid or not? Or you're just bringing that up to invalidate?
Well, that's a good question. That is the question at issue, right? In other words, if somebody told me that they saw my grandmother in the supermarket, my grandmother's been dead for 30 years, I would need more than them telling me they saw my grandmother than believe she rose from the dead.
So T-Rock, don't you think it's interesting that in the New Testament itself, though, with even the resurrection that people talk about all the time,
yeah,
that all these people saw Jesus resurrected and didn't recognize him as himself? So like even the people who saw them, the very thing you're talking about, in the scriptures, they didn't recognize him.
Well, yeah, and that's a very puzzling feature of the scriptures, and people have tried to look at that and explain that. I understand that there are some parallels to that in Homer's writings, or Odysseus is not recognized, or something like that. But I'm not an expert on that topic. But so yeah, I that's a very puzzling thing in the scriptures. There's a lot of puzzling things in there, as we would expect if it was just a human book.
This is why I'm so excited for these conversations. I mean, not that we have to cut it off there, but this is the conversation that I think you should just have with multiple other people in their own ways, and then tell your story to Chad. Because I think
that's
Sorry about that.
I try to be doxastically open, I guess you'd call it.
That's good.
But in the Christian tradition, and this is why I put it in the stream, if I were going to be a Christian, I'd be a pre-Vatican II Roman Catholic, right? Because they got miracles, and it's logical. And it's supported by conciliar evidence and the church fathers. Orthodoxy has a lot of problems.
That kind of doesn't surprise me at all that if you were to be a Christian, you'd be a Thomist.
I got a question real quick before we get.
Well, it's just that Thomism. It's the early church fathers and the councils before Thomas.
Yeah, I mean they would claim all that stuff too. Chad, what up?
I gotta get running here pretty soon. But one time you mentioned that a close family member of yours was a member of a 12-step program.
Yeah, my daughter. She's been in AA for 10 years, clean and sober.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that's awesome, man. Like, so I mean, even though you've had and before I go further, God bless you, because I'm glad there are people out there who are willing to just say, I don't believe you fucking assholes. Or I don't have a lot, or basically I don't have a lot of tolerance for anomaly, let's say.
Yeah.
And that's good. I'm glad somebody's doing it, because somebody has to do it. But what I find interesting is your family member there who has had 10 years of sobriety. I'm guessing if you were to ask her, that she would say that it wasn't her self-will that kept her sober. And I think that's
Yeah,
interesting.
I think there's some utility to certain beliefs. I think there's some utility to it. I'm not denying utility. However, there is, I call it a cheap ticket to heaven and then an expensive ticket to heaven. Okay. The cheap ticket to heaven is, I believe in a God of my understanding. I think a lot of the people here probably that's what they're thinking. I don't have any great beef with that. But when it leads to guilt, shame, persecuting other people, homosexuals are evil, premarital sex is evil, women that aren't virgins are whores, things like that. Then I go, well, the ticket to heaven is getting progressively more expensive.
So you
Yeah.
basically don't like piece of shit theology. We're on the same camp.
Yeah, but
well, I do
yeah.
think there's some good utility to guilt, and there's some good utility to taking responsibility.
Well, of course there's good
for
utility to
being
guilt.
a piece of shit, and
But
I think like it's actually good and useful to recognize, like, and make and try to reach a point where you're able to make amends for the actual wrongs that we've caused other people.
I don't have a beef with that.
Yeah, right.
But that's apart from sin. The idea of sinning. Sinning is against God and His almighty word. See,
But
that's where I have a beef.
But T-Grog, even if that, like if you take sin just to be, because you're preaching to my choir, if you think sin is just disobeying laws and then it makes big angry sky daddy judge angry, that's not what I think sin is. Sin is living in a way that does not accord with truth, goodness, and beauty. That's what sin is.
Well, of course, but Luke, I mean, no offense, you're a nice fellow, but that's a very idiosyncratic interpretation of Christian theology.
Well, I think they're all idiosyncratic. If we're going to be honest about it, this is my point about yesterday. They are all idiosyncratic.
And by the way, I agree with you, Luke. I'm not saying you're wrong. I think that's a much more humane and fair approach to making mistakes, hurting other people. I don't think you should do that.
Yeah, like this. Like I think Foxman's spot on. Sin hurts yourself more than God, or the same. I mean, it's both. It's not good for anyone, including yourself.
Yeah. So, like remarriage and divorce, do you think that's sinful?
Yes.
Why?
Well, I think because it wasn't the ideal. It wasn't the ideal path. It doesn't mean like it. It doesn't mean it's like the end of the road because you sinned. But I mean, there's amends that could be made, and maybe some of the sin you have to carry. I don't know. But I don't to swipe that the idea of sin completely off the table because some are grotesque to our sensibilities is a foolish move, I think.
And Grog, what I would say,
yeah,
what I would say to kind of affirm, I think what you're getting at is that I would say yes, generically, divorce is a sin because I don't think it's obviously because a marriage is a body, it's a union. To divide that union is to break something that's together, and ideally it would hold together. But that doesn't. But what I would also affirm is that sometimes it's, I mean, I don't know, necessary or inevitable, and it's just going to happen.
Yeah, it's my understanding.
That we should prescribe it.
It's my understanding that the Orthodox Church, and correct me if I'm wrong here, allows divorce and remarriage in all sorts of circumstances. So
I think probably most of the churches out there probably do.
Yeah. So how does that comport with it being a sin?
Well,
again,
Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner. The publican and the Pharisee is one of those prime things in orthodoxy. The one who's justified before God isn't the one that says, thank you, God, that I'm not like all these other sinners, but the one that says, have mercy on me, a sinner. It's not somebody who just doesn't sin at all. It's one who recognizes they're a sinner and seeks repentance. That's the one who gets mercy.
Yeah, but repent. Okay. I guess.
Well, what do you
I understand.
Tim?
I understand.
I want to step in for just a second. Sorry.
Go ahead. Sure.
I think some of this comes down to how we see law. So in the West, we kind of see law as part of social contract. It's like the minimum requirement to live together. We have to follow these laws. And if you don't, then you are punished and you go to jail. In the East, the law is seen as the ideal that no one reaches, and it's adapted to the individual person by a judge. And it's a completely different perspective on law. So if you come at sin from the law is something that you can't break or else you get punished and go to jail, it's very different than coming to it as law is the ideal. And if I don't follow it, then there will be consequences in my life, but it's adapted to my situation by people who know me that I'm in a personal relationship with. So the example I was giving in the chat was if you are the Eastern view of sin is different in that if you are a bodybuilder, eating 3 pizzas is a sin. If you are a bodybuilder, missing a workout is a sin. It is you're falling short of the ideal. If you miss 1 workout, are you no longer a bodybuilder? No. If you miss 10 workouts, the effects are going to start setting in. And if you miss 50 workouts, no one is going to look at you and think you're a bodybuilder anymore. Even if you call yourself a bodybuilder, it doesn't matter what you say. It's how you're acting with regard to an aim, with regard to a goal. And so we would say that if you're a professional athlete and you miss a workout, that's a sin. And there are certain things that you do because you're a professional athlete, and certain things you don't do because you're a professional athlete. Does that mean that your coach is a judge? If you start misbehaving enough, like in the NBA, if you go out and have a bunch of felonies, you can no longer participate in the NBA because you're no longer acting within the confines of what it takes to be a professional athlete. And it's much more aspirational rather than minimum requirement. That's all I wanted to say.
So Jeremy, if I were to do a little fact checking on that after we talk, do you think that that's what the majority view is in church history for Orthodoxy, that's what sin is?
Well, in spite of the baiting tone of your question.
No, I'm just saying. I think you're right.
I mean, that's what I've been taught by. That's what I've been taught by the people that.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to bait you, but I hear a lot of people make claims and assertions, and I want to believe that that's correct because I could kind of go along with that. Yeah,
it came from what I'm specifically saying came from a talk by Metropolitan Jonah, who's an archbishop in the Rocourt Church. He's in the Orthodox Church, so he's a trusted someone I trust in his interpretation because he's been involved with it his whole life. So
I apologize for the tone.
Oh no, it's okay.
I'm just
yeah.
I'm my background is fundamentalist, Baptist, Christian apologetics, and I've heard so many fucking bullshitters in Christian apologetics that I'm like up to here. But
I'm with you there. I share that.
Yeah, it's
Well, I have something that I'd like to share. This is a personal thing, and I don't know. Seems like it's appropriate because it's a couple guys that I barely know at all. Because Chad, I talked to Chad about this. The only other people I've talked to about this is my family. But like I had something happen that basically totally recontextualized all my understanding of my whole life and personal experience over the last few weeks. And basically through you know, the YouTube algorithms and things like that, I came across a bunch of videos of people discussing a later in life diagnosis of autism, or autism self-diagnosis. And I had known that I was like on the spectrum because I have ADHD. And so I never really looked into that at all. And this is the only time in my life when I would even be open to considering that. And then I just started listening to all these people talk, and it was like, oh my gosh, that is my experience. I've never heard somebody else talk that way. And the interesting thing about it is because, you know, the way that my brain works is I have a lot of fixations on very social things, language-based things. So, you know, so it wasn't going to get picked up that way, you know, like with delayed speech or anything like that. But the social interactions, I've struggled my whole life, keeping and maintaining friendships. And like I even thought to realize, it's like, how come I have anxiety when I pick up the phone to call my parents, who I know I have a great relationship and I love them, you know, but for some reason, like even picking up the phone to call my own parents is like, you know, just the like I have no idea what's going to happen. So now, going through and looking at all the way that my whole life's unfolded, and in regards to faith, you know, I think the thing is that like the propositions and the like what is truth is so important, because that was only the thing that I could trust. And you know, and I think like T-Grog, I absolutely understand what you're saying, because there's so much bullshit in every single church, and so much of, and you know, and this is like, hey, I'm sola scriptura, and basically it comes to the point of like, you know, if God can speak through a book or whatever, you don't need somebody else's interpretation. You should be able to speak to whoever. You know, nobody's going to get it all right and perfect, but you know, like so much of this stuff you see that's been added on, mostly for the sake of like behavior management. You know, that's why these doctrines get added and tweaked, and why some interpretations are preferred, is because they want to manage people's behavior. And you know, I realized like, well, what is the basis of my faith? What is the basis of my faith? And I realized, like, you know, my parents taught me the Bible, and what the Bible speaks about, like the nature of human beings as these fallen creatures, you should expect that they're not going to always treat you well. You should expect to suffer like Christ did in different ways. But it has a mechanism where those who follow Christ, you know, have this ability to repent of their mistakes and to be forgiven. And what I realized is that, you know, my parents both had like somewhat of radical conversion experiences before I was born. And, you know, and so for them, it was life-changing. And so what I realized is that when I look at the book and the way they live their lives, their propositions that they taught me lined up with their behavior. And when they didn't know stuff, they were honest enough to say, I don't know the answer to that. They didn't give me bullshit answers about stuff. And when they hurt me, when they knew that they had done something wrong, they apologized to me. You know, they didn't try to say, my dad didn't say, I'm the father. You know, you have to, you know, follow my authority. None of that stuff. He had a temper, and he would get mad. And every single time you know, now is, you know, looking back on the whole thing, it's like, oh yeah, I got punished a lot because I was ADHD and autistic and I didn't know how to behave. But whenever I was like, what I do wrong, like he was always asking me to forgive him and apologizing for his mistakes. And like, to give you a context, the person that most reminds me of my dad is PVK. That's why I you know, ended up in this area. But you know, a lot of other relationships with people are not so good. And so you go through life and you realize that people say they believe things and their life doesn't show it at all. Now, sometimes it goes the other way, you know, like there are people who say, you know, I don't believe in God and I'm fed up with church and all that stuff because of all the stupid reasons. But their life shows that they have a love and a compassion for other humans that doesn't really make sense out of a purely materialistic or mechanistic understanding of the universe. Like, why would you help a stranger? Like, but they do. And so you know, this kind of understanding is just really going to show, like, it doesn't necessarily matter what the propositions are. Like, we can argue about that all day long, but do people live according to what they say they believe, and or do they live according to the best you know, maybe toward a standard of living that's better than what they say they believe. You know, and it's like, because I hear so many people that, you know, shared this experience. Most, like, people that have autism or whatever, they usually are atheistic, or they come on that because people who claim to be Christians act so illogically. And so, as much as, like, I understand kind of where Luke's saying with this stuff, like, about, like, the personal knowing and stuff, like, a lot of that whole layer of, like, understanding has been stripped away from me and my relationships with others. And but before I figured this out, before I had this diagnosis, basically at some point I made a choice, and my choice was to say, like, every time somebody hurts me, I could stew on it and think about, like, why did they do that? Why don't they like me? Why don't people want to be my friend? Or I can just say, well, I know that they're fallen, they're sinful, they have a, you know, human nature that doesn't always act consistently with the way they say they should, and I'm going to choose to believe that they didn't mean to hurt me the way they did. And so that, as much as possible, that's just the attitude that I've tried to take with all my interactions with everybody, which is why, you know, I'm really, like, I don't want, you know, I get really, like, creeped out when people, you know, ortho bro, I guess you could say, because to me that seems like, if I was in that church, I could very easily see myself as a younger person being hurt by things that people said and things that people did. But you know, at the end of the day, the forgiveness and the fact that there is, at least in Christianity, a means for getting beyond those inconsistencies, the ways that people lie and don't live according to what they say. To me, that's, you know, shown a continual value in it. And the amazing thing is that, like, having this experience now and, like, realizing, looking back, I'm almost 40 years of life, and, like, I wouldn't change one single thing that ever happened to me. All of the things that hurt me and everything, like, I see it all as, like, bring me to the place that that I am now. I'm so glad to be. And so, you know, I forgive everybody for what they've done to me. So, I mean, I don't know, that is what it is, but that's,
no, I can relate to a lot of what you're saying, Michael. I also grew up with ADD and a touch of the autism, and and I also grew up in a very a blue collar environment. Like, all my family were welders or related to the welding industry somehow, like the natural gas industry. And so I came from that very meritocratic point of view of, like, their world is very meritocratic, right? So if I wanted to be, you know, like, I would become a good welder through practice, but at the end of the day, there's a level and a square, right? So, and a tape measure, and you have the same level and square that I do, and so there's a tape measure, and we can say, yes, this matches the drawing. Now, and this actually, all, like, understanding the construction world is actually what helped me understand Jonathan Peju's point of view. I didn't it's like, when I grew up, you know, reading the scriptures, heaven and earth was like, heaven was some other place and earth was here and all that, right? But what Jonathan pointed me at was the fact that like when so I work in steel fabrication still to this day. There's someone who has a need. They draw something, and an engineer draws something, and the engineer, especially in our current day and age, generally doesn't have much experience with actually building something. So they draw the ideal, but they do put tolerances in there in certain dimensions, because they understand that there is no ideal. You can't build an ideal thing because it will not fit in the world. The parts are all various sizes and everything needs to fit, but there needs to be some give in certain dimensions to enable you to actually fit things together in the real world. So you take the drawing, and then you have the raw material. You could say the drawing is heaven. The drawing is the ideal. It's the pattern. You have the material, you have the raw material, the iron, the fittings, everything that comes from the different places. It's been inspected to say, and there's a standard for those things, right? Like this steel like this type of steel has to have this composition, right? So that's all already been judged, but it's sitting at your feet, and you take the raw materials and you modify them through time and the application, the skillful application of heat, and you transform it. It transforms into a new thing that matches the drawing. Then you have an inspector that comes along, and the inspector looks at the thing, measures it with a ruler, with a level, with a square. Does it conform to the specification, to the drawing, to the ideal? Yes, it's just within tolerance. We do recognize it's not going to perfectly fit the ideal, but it does fit the tolerance. It is a thing. They sign the paper. When they sign the paper, it becomes real, and it gets that name. It gets a new name, and it enters into the world with a new identity. The raw materials in the drawing have been transformed into a real thing that I interact with, and it has been blessed by a priest, so to speak, who you could call the inspector. Now, the inspector can also look at it and say, this does not meet the ideal, and it needs to be continued to be transformed. But then once it's transformed, it becomes a new thing. It takes on a name. And what's really hard to explain to the welders is that the paperwork that goes along with the drawing that says it meets the specification is just as important as the physical thing, or else it doesn't exist in the world. Like if I just send the thing to the world and it has not been blessed by an inspector, it does not exist. It can't be used. It can't be integrated into the plant, right? So once I understood that Jonathan was talking about heaven is the drawing and earth is the materials, and the person is the mediator between those two things that is bringing them into the world, transforming it according to the ideal, exposing it to the judgment of the inspector, the priest, and then it gets blessed with a new name and enters into the world, all of a sudden everything that he was saying started making a lot more sense. And it wasn't, no one had ever explained it to me that way before when I was younger, right? Like it was too abstract and too like otherworldly. It's very in the world. Like that's where I started feeling crazy, because when I started seeing Jonathan's worldview playing out in my own world, I was like, well, this just makes so much sense now. And then I could start seeing patterns in the world because of the things that the scriptures were talking about. These patterns were being revealed in my own world. And that's where I started really shifting, right? The other thing that happened to me was that I went from working in the field as a welder with a ruler and a square and a level to going into the office, where you're dealing more in the abstract, and all of a sudden now you're dealing more in the relational. And as a left-brained autistic ADHD person dealing with relationality, where there is no level, there is no square, we don't know who's a good project manager and who's not. We do, but it has a very different meaning. Being a good project manager is very different than being a welder. Like being a very good welder means I conform to the drawing, and I can produce something that matches the drawing without error on the first try. That's a good welder. A project manager, I had to learn, was someone who delivers things on schedule. Well, how do you deliver and on budget? How do you do that? By buying pizza for the guys who are loading the truck to come in on Saturday, right? It's a total shift, and it was really hard for me to make, and I wasn't very good at it at first because I was too tied to the physical real world of geometry and angles and rulers. Moving into the right brain world was very difficult for me, but something that helped the transition was we had two questions. I'm sorry to go on a big rant, but I feel like this ties into T-Grog's conversation and your worldview, T-Grog. I'm trying to help you understand how I move from a hard materialist point of view to being open to what Jonathan Pageau and other people in this realm are talking about. And the other thing that happened to me was I ran into chaos theory, and it was totally by accident. I was trying to predict how many are we going to ship next week or next month? Like, how many pieces of pipe are we going to ship? How many pieces? And when is this particular one going to ship? And what I found is that it's chaos theory, because we work in an environment where the basic fundamental unit of a fabrication shop is a person. And this is what makes it different from manufacturing. In manufacturing, the basis of their system is a machine. A machine is very predictable. A machine puts out, like, they can get down to the 10th of a second on how long it's going to take to produce a part. When I hand a piece of pipe to a welder, if I hand it to this welder, it's going to take 1 hour. If I hand it to that welder, it's going to take 4 hours. And I can't predict which one the supervisor is going to hand it to, right? And this guy might have been able to do it in an hour yesterday, but today it's going to take him 4 hours because he had an argument with his wife last night. All of a sudden, all of this materialism, all this prediction, all these statistics, all this math, it breaks, right? It's deterministic. It's a deterministic environment with inputs and outputs, but it's unpredictable because it's chaos theory. And it's because the output is governed by the output of a person. And when you put 50 of them together, 50 people together outputting things, it's going to be an unpredictable range of possibilities of outcomes. So when they asked me, like, I spent 4 years studying that and Monte Carlo simulation and probability theory and Bayes' theorem, and at the end of the day I came up with a model based on Monte Carlo simulation. And they asked me, how many are we going to ship next week? And I said, I'm 80% sure we're going to ship between 60 and 110. And they did not like that answer. But it's mathematically accurate, and it's as good as it gets. And that's what started undermining my materialistic worldview. And now it took a lot of shift, and there was also a lot of like personal things that were happening in my relationships, where again I was being pointed at the fact that there's more to the world than what your left brain can deal with. There's more to the world than what you can measure with a spreadsheet or with a ruler, and it has to do with relationality. And science does not have much to say about relationality. I mean, there's psychology, but there's all kinds of problems with that. You know that, right? So what I found was that having my eyes opened to Jonathan Pageau's symbolic worldview by coming at it from an old retarded welder point of view is what enabled me to actually see that the right brain sees the world in a much more complete way because it's more contextual. I don't ignore my left brain anymore. I still work in a shop. There's still a tape measure. There's still a ruler, but there's also a relationality that I have to try to communicate to my managers all the time and try to say, these guys aren't machines. Something's going wrong. Why don't you just go talk to them? Another Excel spreadsheet's not going to answer it. And I'm the guy who makes the report for the company. That's what my job is. So anyway, that's my very long rant, but I wanted to give you some context of where I'm coming from to help you understand that I don't discount the scientific worldview. My life is based on geometry and engineering. My living comes from that, but there's more to the world than what I can measure. Yeah. And my relationships don't work with a tape measure. And I was blind to that until I was 40 years old.
Me too.
Well, I hope someone's going to clip Michael, your lead in to that, Jeremy. I coined it blue collar theology. That was really good stuff. And so for me, like, T-Grog, when I, hear you talk or whatever, it's like, so also I can be accused of being an ortho bro, but I could also be accused of being a 12-step bro, because I've lived these things and I've seen these patterns and I've seen them work with human beings and I've practiced them and I've failed at them and everything else. One of the things that the 12 steps talks about is I've tried to hold on to my old ideas and the result was nil until I let go absolutely. And it gets you you actually start doing these things. Like, you go through these practices, you go through these exercises, you do these steps. And when you start working that out in your real life, you know, and a big part of it is, you know, you open yourself up to the idea that there is some higher power. So you just, that's the first, you just open yourself up to it. You don't say you believe anything. You just have to be willing to do these things. You just open yourself up to it. And then you get yourself getting into life, right? And all of a sudden your life starts exposing these things that are beyond measurements and everything else and all these old ideas you have. And through these practices of effectively kind of looking at yourself, your patterns, what makes you tick. So like one of the things that happens, Michael, like in Jeremy or whatever, one of the things that happens in a 4-step is you write down, you know, the exact nature of kind of all your wrongs, so on and so forth. But you just take this, basically it's this, your personal inventory, a fearless moral personal inventory. And you look at strengths and weaknesses and stuff, but one of the things that really happens is you start seeing these patterns play out. If you zoom out enough and you have a good sponsor, like, oh my gosh, there are these recurring patterns in my life. When I do these things, I either feel fear or I strike out and I hurt people this way or that way. And so you start looking at this stuff, and then you start going through a pattern of trying to work on those things. And then ultimately one of the big portions of 12-step life is getting yourself into a place of forgiveness and acceptance, and then going out and making amends, reconciling with the people in your life, right? Getting reconciled. By the way, that's where the rubber hits the road. And through the process of working this messy thing out in your own personal life, what happens is people have spiritual awakenings as the result of these steps. All of a sudden, through just letting go of the left brain per se and just getting into doing these practices and these actions, God reveals himself, right? But you have to be open to it. You have to be aware. You have to be open to new ideas. You have to be open to the revelation. Like, I think, Jeremy, that was what was really interesting is, as you were talking about that, giving us some maps where we can, those things that we know that are real, right? And then so Jonathan Pajot just gave you this thing where all of a sudden now you can see how you're like, and Jonathan says this all the time, oh, that's how life really works.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
oh wow, this is like how it really works. And the other thing that's really interesting, Michael, that I could relate to your story and to you, Jeremy, is I didn't realize this, but I had a slight bipolar disorder. Now, I was an extremely high achieving person my whole life, academically, athletically. Like I could really stay at the upper levels. You put me in a competitive environment and I'm going to, you know, God bless me with a lot of talents, I could finish at the top. But what I didn't realize is I could tend towards some mania. And what that mania would be is it would make me impulsive. So I'd make impulsive decisions, right? I would get too sped up and too fast and I would miss things. And so even though I could achieve all these great things in a material world, I could finish at the top of my class. I could go make the most money. I could do all the things. I could win the game. I know how to win the game, right? But I was missing more important elements of that. Once I realized, and someone helped me, like I actually was in my 40s, late 30s, probably maybe 39. It was pointed out, hey, this was part of my recovery efforts and therapy. They said, I think you have this bipolar thing going. And they, in the same way, what happens in AA when people tell their stories, like you talk about it, Michael, where you heard people talking about the spectrum stuff, you're like, oh my God, they're describing what goes on in my head. That's what happens in a meeting when people finally, when they look for similarities, they're like, this person's like reading my story. They're telling my life. You can do that. And when I grabbed hold of this little piece to go, oh my gosh, I've got this thing, but now that I know this thing and I can name it or whatever, it describes, and now I can be on the lookout for, am I talking too fast? Mm-hmm. Because if I'm talking too fast and if I'm not sleeping well, oh my gosh, I'm getting ready to kind of get into something that could be some sort of mania. I better not be making any big decisions right now. I need to slow my speech down. I need to slow my movement down. Like all of these things that now that I can realize can help me live and move and be a better human being in the world, right? And so, I think that what you guys just shared there, like, I'm just going to tell you, I was resonating with so much of that, right? And to me, this is the magic of the corner. That wasn't thinky talky stuff. You guys are explaining real things in your life, practical revelations that you had, how you've applied that into your life. And I would think for you, Michael, and I know your story, Jeremy, but I think for you, Michael, like finally realizing this thing about yourself is going to just totally blow the doors open where you can say, oh, okay, I'm wired this way. And it's okay that I'm wired this way. I'm not different or whatever. Okay, now I can actually have some tools and some understanding. When you start feeling some of those feelings, you're like, those probably aren't real. I don't need to be anxious calling my parents. So, you know, like that thing, like that next level you're going to have is going to be amazing. Like I'm excited for you because I think that's probably opened a major door in your life that is going to it's going to play big fruits in how you move around on a daily basis.
It's huge for my marriage. But the
Yeah,
amazing.
that's. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Michael.
Oh
Go
no,
ahead.
the amazing thing. Reflecting on my life, like, and listening to other people who have gone through the same thing, and like, so much of my energy has been spent navigating normal social interactions that I've, you know, and like a lot of people, they end up with PTSD. Like when they go in to test them, they test for like PTSD because just the way that I like react to little rejections and embarrassments and things like that is totally out of whack. But what I realized is that compared to so many other people, like just the tools of like, you know, the tools, but you know, my relationship with Christ and the whole Christian thing, which is what I put all my focus into studying, even though I never quite felt like I fit in all the things, it helped mitigate so much of what could have been way worse. And like, and it's definitely like now, like, especially like in my marriage and like understanding like, oh, this is why, you know, we have these communication issues and stuff. It's going to be a big help. But like, you know, without the support of the church and all that stuff, like, because that's what I say, not just my parents, but I would say in general, my vast experience is that most Christians live pretty close to what they claim that they believe, and I think that some of those kind of like bullshit add-ons in some, you know, different denominations and stuff make it harder for people to be honest about their own failings, and then that causes a lot of problems. But in general, like yeah, I don't know, I think Christians are more consistently trustworthy people than you know, non-Christians or whatever, in my experience. So
Yeah, and what I was going to say is that because I had that more left brain view of the world and more meritocratic and more spreadsheet view of the world, my relationships were very transactional, and everyone in my life felt that and knew that, and as a result, my relationships were falling apart. And I approached God with that same transactionality, and what started opening up was that there is more to the world. The right brain, like the whole Ian McGilchrist divided brain view, really helped me as well to see how context and relationality is so much more important. And then and I would tie that back to my drawing versus building thing analogy, in that the drawing has tolerance, and another word for tolerance would be mercy. Right? It's the mercy that allows it to fit into the world in a way that we know is not perfect. That's what mercy is. Well, God just has an incomprehensible amount of that with regard to us fitting into his pattern. Right. And that translates over. And then the other thing that translates over really well is in Greek, we have remnants of this in our language, because in Greek, the father is pattern and the mother is matter. So we have paternal, we have pattern, which is the heavenly, and we have matter, which is the potential, maternal, mother, right? That's it. It's built into Greek, and it's built into our language too, but we're blind to it, right? This pattern between it's a pattern of how things interact. You have the paternal ideal, and the ideas and the concepts come down into the world, and as they come down, they're brought into reality by the maternal that gathers the raw elements together, forms a new thing and gives it a name, right? So, and then the priest names it. Like in Orthodox, in the Orthodox Church, the priest, you bring your baby to the priest on the 8th day, and the priest speaks his name to the church into reality. It becomes a thing, right? So, anyway, that's all of these what were concepts to me before became very real when I was able to make the connection to actually building something.
Well, can you know, I've been pretty quiet here, but
yeah, and I'm sorry, go ahead.
Like Jonathan's overarching narrative, can you think of any way to test that narrative, to actually determine if it's just not some guy, you know, cooking things up in his head? I could do that too. I'm a pretty smart guy. I could make grand narratives, and
so I would say this. So the evidence
because of that.
So here's the evidence. So here's the evidence, Tigran.
Well, can you let me finish?
Well, go ahead.
Because there are these grand narratives, and by the way, I would say that in Jonathan's case, that could be applicable to any religion, any philosophy you could think of. So if it applies to everything, then it really applies to nothing. That's my position. So how do you test such a grand, you know, there's a designer or an architect, and then he's got the real deal, and he's got the plans, and then it's very opaque and very ambiguous, and it doesn't seem to comport with the history of the universe, the history of life on Earth, you know, things like that. So that's just my take on it.
Sure.
Well, I would say, so what's your evidence? So what's your evidence? My evidence are the millions of folks who've come into AA and put the spiritual program into practice and have had these radical shifts. And they can tell you in real ways how they've been transformed, and they've come to a knowing and an understanding and a realization that this higher power works, so on and so forth. I mean, so the fact of the matter is, you have to live it. You can stand on the sidelines critiquing, thinking. I mean, new atheism, you know, it's falling apart right all around you, T-Grog, and there's a reason for that, because it doesn't work. And so I would say that the thing is, the challenge for people is live the life. Like, you have to actually start working in the practices. And at the end of the chapter to We Agnostics and the 12 steps, it says when we drew near to him, he disclosed himself to us. And I guess the thing that I would say about, if you spend time just being open and listening to Jonathan Pageau, and even if you would look into Jordan Peterson, is this ultimately Christ and what has been revealed in it is the ultimate truth, that when you start living this out and seeing things as they really are, that it is the pattern, that it is true. But how you're going to work this out, I would say, for any individual is, it's like, you're going to have to live it. You're going to have to put these practices. Now, it's not propositions. And Tayo, where you're around, he says Lance always talks about practices, but I get that because I'm a very heady guy. Like, I had to move from my head to my heart. And one of the things that happens is that's why I keep talking about, you have to live these things out. And by living them out, these things will be disclosed to you. And so one of the things I would say is, when I first started kind of being exposed to Orthodoxy, and I was reading patristics, about 30 days in, what I said was, I'm going to go down to my nearest church and I want to see if this works. That's literally what I said. I want to see if this works. Why did I say that? Well, because I knew that there were these patterns and these practices that I've seen both within my own spiritual life and both within 12-step programs. And I also knew that there were certain things that I really struggled with within my existing, for example, prayer. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak. Like, I really struggled with developing a really good prayer life and consistent prayer life. It was a struggle my whole life. That would be just one example. So anyway, I went to it, and all of a sudden, a lot of things came alive. But then I started working on the practices, which were, I started to incorporate fasting. I got a prayer rule in place. I really started to go deep into practicing the Jesus prayer. And then I was having all of these transformations that were happening in me that were like, oh my gosh. And I was able to keep consistency. Like the discipline gave me more freedom. Like there were, it sounds like rules and you don't have to do it, but if you want, but if you want to be transformed, you do it. So again, I think getting into Luke's talks about, it's personal, it's lived. You have to put these things in practice and be open to having new disclosures and revelations being given to you. But it's in the living and the doing and the openness is where it is revealed to you.
But Lance, that every religious person who's ever lived could say that. So you just don't understand because you haven't lived the experience of Buddhism or Hinduism or so worshiping Zeus or Aphrodite. 100%. See, it's
Paul Kingsnorth would talk to you about, he became a Wiccan and he was a Zen Buddhist and he was doing those things and he got to the end of those things and realized there was something deeply missing.
But some people don't.
They say that,
yeah.
Well, some people don't. That's again.
Yeah, some people say Wiccans. That's the greatest thing ever. So
they can, but so again, people are going to live and do these things. And listen, it's just we're all just going through this life and kind of finding our way. But the reality is, the proof is in the millions upon millions of people that have done these things and have had real, tangible, knowing experiences in it. And the only way to do it is to seek it and pursue it. Now, again, if you think that math describes the meaning of life and all these other things, God bless you.
Nobody ever said that.
Those sorts of things. But I mean, again, you can stand outside, contempt, and the big book talks about contempt before investigation. And the doctor's opinion is say, may you come to scoff, but remain to pray. Like, we're really good about standing on the outside and poking those things in it. But again, the only way, I mean, some people need to do a certain amount of intellectual gymnastics before they can maybe be willing to step in and open themselves up to a higher power. And then I firmly believe, and this is it, T-Grog, is that the same way like Paul Kingsnorth, Jesus started hounding him. And when you tell him Terry's story, he did not want the answer to be Christ. But in the end, he realized exactly what he was getting called to, and he couldn't ignore it anymore. And he found himself finding out that Christ was the ultimate reality. And so these things you talk about, Jonathan Pageau and these grand things, through his own living into it and understanding it, he realized this is the pattern. This is the reality.
You realize, of course, that Christianity is a blip in human existence, right? I mean, there have been humans for at least 100,000 years, probably.
No, because Christianity.
Okay. No,
Christianity just.
So these people
to in the beginning, it goes. God's been revealing Himself in the beginning. Christ was the moment in time where it became fulfilled. But that story, the Christian story, doesn't just start 2,000 years ago. It starts in the beginning.
In the beginning, when?
Oh, Lance is muted.
When God created heaven and earth.
And when was that?
When the unmoved mover, when all things were created.
But when was that? Was it 6,000 years ago? 50,000 years ago?
Does that matter?
Okay.
Well, it does because what I'm saying is that
if he created everything, does it matter whether he created everything 10,000 years ago or $1 million years ago? It doesn't matter.
I would say
just some little fact. That's just some little fact that we'll play a game.
I would say it does matter because since humans are the crown of creation, the Bible story in Genesis focuses on that, right? But in geologic history or cosmological history, human beings showed up very recently, and there have been tens of thousands of generations of humans who've lived and died never heard a damn thing about Jesus. So
God's been revealing himself from the beginning. See, again, you're coming with a very specific point of view. If you would talk to a lot of Christians,
I'm trying to be clear.
You're ascribing a very specific set of what that looks like, and you can do that again when you live into this. And I think one of the things I point you towards is Jonathan Pajot has this amazing, and Jordan Peterson put it on his channel, where Jonathan Pajot goes through Genesis 1 and starts to show how the way he was creating things and the pattern, and kind of how we have these layered in hierarchies getting built, and how Genesis 1 reveals the true reality of how everything was created.
I'm confused. I'm confused. Why is Jonathan Pajot an authority on the Bible?
Hey,
has he got any credentials in biblical scholarship?
So I can. Here, I'll give you my.
He's just some guy. He's an iconographer. He doesn't. Who's he? I mean, he's just some guy, right?
He's a guy. He's a guy who I listen to, and then I say, I don't think he's right about that, almost constantly.
Well, there you go. See.
But I'll give you. Okay.
He's a self-appointed expert.
Forget Pajot. Okay, and I'll try to get it on terms that I think you agree on.
He grab and play that game with everyone.
The origins of the universe and everything that exists either is impersonal in nature, which would fit a lot of worldviews, like a materialist worldview, or if like a theistic worldview, it's personal. It's got to be one or the other. It can't be. Those are the only two options, more or less.
It could be personal. God could have created everything. God passed out of existence. He destroyed himself when he created everything.
Okay, well, but either way, so those are our two options: personal or impersonal. If the origins of the universe are personal, then it makes sense that the personal creator would, in some sense, want to relate that nature of creation to the beings in it.
Why?
Because what would be the point of creating it?
Who knows? God's ways are inscrutable.
Well,
we don't know.
Well, okay, fine. Then we'll just skip to the part where it's Jesus, but where God reveals himself fully to the most tangible way that people can understand him. But I would say, if you look at the story of the Bible and all the other religious texts and everything else that you've said, you can find all the similarities and all these things. The thing that they have in common is some notion of understanding that people can have of the universe that they live in. Now, if there's 100,000 years of humans that lived prior to all that written stuff, or 90,000 or whatever, then we don't have evidence of them creating vast civilizations and killing each other and making atom bombs and all this stuff. So we can just assume that their peaceful existence was perfectly pleasing to the personal creator of the universe. And, something just went wrong more recently. Well, in the more recent times, across all civilizations, you have these circumstances of people having some sort of interaction with the divine, or some spiritual thing that has a connection to the universe.
That's true.
Yeah, and then recently we have a larger majority of people rejecting that whole thing. And what has been the benefit of that to humanity? I mean, you wouldn't have had communism without the atheistic worldview. You probably wouldn't have had the world wars without, there was no spiritual component to those. And right now you have people basically trying to live all of their life based on assumptions about what their biology is telling them to do, and seeing their biology as an unconquerable force that directs what they do, or they live by some just inner sense of right and wrong. So I mean, what I would say is that if you want to take, like, we can get in the weeds, and like I said, there's probably all sorts of stuff where people have been adding things on and corrupting text and all that stuff. But if God, I'll say whatever. I like the Bible. That's my one. But I would say if God is going to communicate to people in such a way, he's going to be able to know both that that some will try to faithfully preserve what he says, and some people will do a bad job of it, and some people will intentionally screw it up. And I think that if he's smart enough to create the universe, he could communicate in such a way that a gist gets through that is something other than we are just the product of chance over long periods of time and material things, and therefore we're slaves to our biological desires. In the coming of Christ, like from my perspective, like, saying I have this inability to understand what other people are going to do. Seemingly there's a kind of a vibe that other people get. They can say, I can trust you. I'm sketched out by that guy. To me, completely unpredictable. And I think knowing this even from a book, and I would say I've had spiritual experiences, none of them that contradict in any way things that the Bible say about Jesus, that if there's one human person that lived their life absolutely consistently, absolutely lived according to the propositional values that they espoused, and all of their action is consistent, that is enough of a ruler or a square or a tape measure.
Oh man, he was just getting to his. Here he comes. You're back.
Yeah. So the life of Jesus as a person that would do the things that he did, say the things that he did, and willingly sacrifice his own existence for the sake of those he loves, and which is fine saying everybody. That gives me something that I can then navigate the rest of life. And like I said, I saw that pretty consistently in my parents. I saw it pretty consistently with some differences that helped me to say, oh, I think these are better and worse versions of Christianity. But it's given me a path. If you take that away, I don't know how I can trust anything. I don't, and personally, I think you get to the thing where people don't know if they are just living in a simulation. So,
yeah. And I think, do you believe in the Big Bang, T-Grog? Is that something, or you don't really?
Well, I would say this: scientific knowledge is provisional. The evidence seems to indicate that there was a vast expansion of our current universe at a point about 13.8, 14 billion years ago. That's my understanding of it. That's another thing I object to with some folks like Peterson. These guys are world experts on every topic you can imagine. They never say, I don't really know about that. I don't really understand that very well. They never say that. They always say, well, of course, X, Y, Z. I'm not an astronomer. I used to teach science at high school, middle school, all that stuff. But from my understanding, our current universe entered a state of expansion, 13.8, something like that, plus or minus whatever. And that's the current understanding of the origin of this manifold that we inhabit. Okay. That says nothing about all of reality or anything else.
So would you think that was some sort of materialistic, physicalistic event that happened that brought this current universe into its existence?
Well, going back to Jeremy's point about welding, and I thought were very, very important, cool things to think about. I'm not a person who does well working with their hands. I wish I could do the things that Jonathan Peugeot does with my hands, but I can't. That's not my thing. But I would just say that the scientific understanding of the origins of the universe seems to not point to any grand design or grand intelligence or some caring, loving father who's looking out for his creation or anything. It doesn't indicate that. If the Bible story in Genesis was actually accurate, which of course it's not, that would indicate that there's an intelligent God. If we lived on a flat earth with a dome over it, with little twinkly lights in it, that would be strong evidence that that story actually points to some God of some sort. But that's not the universe we inhabit. We inhabit a vast universe where most of the
caricature of it. Because one of the things, I guess, one of the things.
What's your favorite movie?
Well, it depends on the genre. I like, in science fiction terms, I have to go with Blade Runner, of course. In terms of gangster movies, I probably would say The Godfather. In terms of
that's a good one.
Biographical films, I'd probably have to say A Beautiful Mind, or I find the idea of human genius to be fascinating, and most geniuses are very, let's put it this way, they're disagreeable.
Well, he was also schizophrenic, The Beautiful Mind, which means like he was on the border of a lot of things that you would not call real, right? Like he saw things.
Yeah, I understand. You're talking about, yeah. John Nash was a schizophrenic.
It's a topic that you bring up, right? Because
John Nash was a schizophrenic, but he had, and from the way I look at it as a materialist, his brain was just wired for mathematical thinking. There are people, they're just wired that way, and they see the world differently. And that's what's cool about them. They do extraordinary things because they don't see the world the same way as most folks. But they tend to be very arrogant. They tend to be very dismissive of others. But they do things. Most of them are assholes, and very contrary to norms of academic life. I find it sad that our universities are getting away from those people. Those people would be kicked out immediately these days because.
No, it depends what. As long as they espouse a certain code, they would probably.
Well, if they worked in the defense industry, they might be kicked out. But
I want to come with this. Okay, really quick. I want to come at this from a little different angle. So for me, like trying to see the story of the origin of the physical universe in the Bible is obviously, and trying to get that to reconcile with our scientific view is a exercise in futility. You've already identified the issues with that. I don't even, it really doesn't matter to me, frankly. And here's why: because I don't see the Bible as needing to make those claims or even making those claims. The Bible is revealing patterns. It's revealing patterns, in my view. So these stories reveal patterns, right? And this was really hard for me to reconcile with, because of my left brain orientation and a little bit of the tism, like I grew up reading the encyclopedia. I bought fully into the Enlightenment ideals. I thought the encyclopedia was the greatest thing. I love dictionaries. I collect dictionaries. Like those are all Enlightenment projects, right? I sought knowledge. I sought to understand things. I wanted to know things. I wanted to do all those things, right? I aspired to be a scientist. I aspired to go to Oxford, right? Like ADD got in the way of that, but that's a different story. What I had to come to a realization of is that the Bible, like the whole reason I left Mormonism, the whole reason I left the faith of my youth was because it didn't stand up to scientific scrutiny, because I tried to make it do that, and it's not trying to. It's not claiming to. The Bible's not trying to do that. What I had to understand, and this took me a long time too, because of my meritocratic background and because of my autism, is that people are not motivated by facts. People don't give a shit about facts. And you can give them a million facts and they don't care, and they don't even know how to make sense of it. What people need is, everybody has a hierarchy of values. They have to, because the world has too many facts. This is all Vervaeke stuff, right? We compress things. We have heuristics. Our brains are already filtering most of the senses out before we even see the world or are even aware of seeing the world, because we can't take it all in. It already is conforming to a hierarchy of values that speaks to what we want to achieve. It's like what we want or what we think the highest ideals are. That's what reveals the world to us. And because we are story making people, we see the world in story form. We see the world in narrative form. And it's a more complete, more accurate way of seeing the world than just the scientific view. And here's my small little example that I like to use. I have many knives in my house. Which knife is the best knife? Well, scientifically, you can't answer that question, because first I have to tell you what I want to use the knife for.
That's correct.
Right? So you can tell me all of the physical properties, and you can give me a list a million years long, and you can give me all the chemical makeups and all the compositions of the steel and the different alloys and how that affects everything and the heat treatment, all that stuff. But you can't tell me which one is best, because the best comes from a hierarchy of values, and it relies on me first stating what my intention is. Well, the Bible is revealing patterns. It's revealing how those hierarchy of values work. And it really doesn't, like, for the pattern to work, it doesn't matter what's at the top, because it fractally moves up and down that scale, right? The truth is fractal. The truth is not physical. The truth is a fractal, right? So this goes back to the measurement problem of the coast of England. How long is the coast of England? Well, you'll never get it exactly right, because no matter how small your measuring stick is, it will never quite conform to the coastline. And that's
so does God know how big the coast of England is? Does God know it?
Well, the answer is it's infinite, because it's fractal. It's a fractal
so God
scale.
Doesn't know. There's no knowledge.
It's the wrong question. It's a fractal. There is no final answer. It's a fractal.
So
that's the nature of fractals.
There are things like that God doesn't know.
No, it's you're assuming that there's a numerical answer to that question, and I'm saying the answer is it's a fractal. It's infinite.
Well, you could say that about everything. Time is infinite. Well, actually, they would say time stops at blank time.
So that's part of what I wanted to do.
There is nothing.
I feel like you're trying to freeze the Bible into a historical narrative, and it's only written as a historical narrative to reveal patterns. It's not trying to tell you this is exactly minute for minute what happened. It's trying to compress all of the most meaningful parts of how reality works into a pattern to reveal the pattern to you. And those patterns nest within each other like Russian nesting dolls.
That's Jonathan's perspective, and I understand.
Right. And I'm saying you can begin to experience that, because I experienced that first through drawings, becoming, you can experience it as a cook with a recipe becoming, and the ingredients, and it comes together and makes bread. The bread's been transformed. It no longer has the properties of any of the ingredients. It becomes a new thing through heat and time and through manipulation, right? It becomes transformed. This is a pattern. The pattern is revealed to you in the scriptures, and it's revealing patterns to you. And as you begin to see these patterns in more and more places in your life, all of a sudden your life becomes more meaningful, because you start seeing that you are participating in a story that is connected with other people, and the way they respond to you affects you, and the way you act toward them affects them, and it comes in this cyclical thing that becomes meaningful. because it affects how you relate to the world. And so all of a sudden the world becomes meaningful because you can see these patterns. And it becomes much more meaningful than memorizing facts, because most of the time the facts that you know don't apply anymore. Because some facts are more perennial than others, but many facts are ephemeral and float away quickly. Right? You can never know enough facts, because the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know. So let's have a way of contextualizing these things, and let's have a way of framing these things so that as we learn things, we can actually interact with it in a more participatory and more meaningful way. Right? If you limit yourself to, here's what empiricism can tell me, you'll never be able to tell me which knife is the best knife.
Well, it depends on what you want to know and what you want to use it
Yeah,
for.
so, but I'm saying there's a large chunk of human experience that is not subject to empiricism.
Right.
Really?
And I think to
Outside
your
the realm of
defense,
empiricism.
like to your defense, T-Grog, like you and I are probably similar in age to some extent, or at least lived through
70.
more decades than some of those other folks. So I was born in 1970. The milieu I grew up in, a lot of Christians were basically material reductionists trying to use the Bible as a scientific text, and they're trying to make arguments in a rationalistic way. And so it was definitely framed that way. And again, that caused a lot of internal struggles for me, T-Grog. I think one of the beautiful things about Jordan Peterson, to talk about the hierarchies you're talking about, Jeremy, and kind of the stories and so on and so forth. I think one of the gifts that Jordan Peterson has is he comes from it from a very scientific worldview, right? Because he has that worldview. He's a cognitive scientist, so he has that brain there. But one of the things I think that really helped him, talking about these patterns, is his clinical practice. So he wasn't just up here in an ivory tower thinking about thinky-talky things. He was dealing with real life people and trying to help them through tremendous suffering and everything else. And so he has this beautiful mix of this real world experience dealing with human things, human beings trying to make their way through the world. He has all these other things that he's seen, and he's got this, he has the highly personal while he also has the highly academic. And what you're talking about, Jeremy, if you spend any time with Jordan Peterson as he's wrestling with his way through things, you walk how his biblical series through Genesis and how he's mapping all these things together and bringing all these things together. It breaks it free from that Bible, which a lot of Christians have done, of this material reductionist science, trying to force it into some sort of scientific worldview, which that text was never meant to be exactly, Jeremy, right? And so, but again, like T-Grog, like your critique of Christians who've tried to put it into this frame, because that is the frame that I was like, that was a very frame that I grew up in, where they were literally trying to just make scientific, materialist, reductionist arguments out of the Bible, and I live in a very, what I might just loosely use the term, fundamentalist way. And it basically, it just took this beautiful, expansive reality thing and shrunk it down into this little box. And it's very easy to critique. And I critique it, luckily more has been revealed, and I'm very grateful for certain thinkers and stuff that happened to that I've been able to see the error in all that.
Well, I think that's nice. I think that part of the objection I would have to Christianity in general and theism in general and Christianity in particular is that nobody agrees on any of this stuff. And there's certain, in this little corner, there's certain gurus who cannot be questioned, like Jordan Peterson, Jonathan Peugeot. These people are just people.
Yeah.
They're not, by the way, they don't know. They're not biblical scholars. They're just,
Biblical scholars don't know either. I'm here to tell you, and they disagree.
I would say,
of course,
they can be questioned.
If there were a loving God, he'd try to communicate clearly with people so they wouldn't disagree so much. That's my hypothesis. When I'm a father, I'm talking to my children who I love. I don't give them mysteries to unravel. I'm trying to help.
Well, that's part of the seduction
and guide them.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
The disagreement here and this new way of interpreting the scriptures and
It's not
Jesus
new.
and all this stuff
It's not new.
is
The historical view is new, to be fair. The historical view, the historical biblicism, the historical scholar view, that's very new. That's from the 18th century, from Germany.
so nobody thought these stories actually happened? They were
That's
just
not what I said. I didn't say
Yeah,
the
I'm
stories
just
didn't actually
saying.
happen. I said that. So did Schindler's List happen? Yeah, it was a pattern, and it was based on a true story, and it played out in real time in a way that can never be captured on film. But Schindler's List also is a story that compresses those things. It compresses characters, it compresses themes, it compresses things that happen into a narrative that we can relate to and take meaning from. But that doesn't mean it didn't happen. It did happen, but not the way it was portrayed in the film. But that does that mean that the film is not true, or that it's not meaningful, or it's not helpful?
So was Adam a historical person, or is that just a pattern?
Yes.
He was a historical person, or he was a
yes,
pattern?
and he is a pattern. He's me, and I am Adam and Eve, and I am Christ,
You
and I
are
am
Adam
Judas,
and Eve.
and I am like all of those are parts of me too.
So
right?
you're specially created by
microcosm.
God.
What?
You were specially created by God out of the dust of the earth.
I shouldn't say I'm Christ. I'm not. I'm saying I'm the biblical character. Yeah, I was formed out of nothing in my mother's womb.
Yeah,
and
but not
Christ breathed breath into me, and I became a spirit. And yeah, this is the fractal nature of what I'm talking about.
Yeah, see,
it is a story.
That's another thing I object to.
Reality. It's a fractal reality.
Yeah,
it scales up.
The language is confusing. Fractal reality. There's a whole subdiscipline of mathematics that deals with fractals.
Yeah, and you've studied.
I am not.
Fractals are real.
That I'm not. That
I'm
not an expert in.
Space.
That I'm not an expert in, and
right.
neither is Jonathan Peugeot, and neither is Jordan Peterson.
Here's what a fractal.
They're talking about stuff they don't really understand. That's my hypothesis.
So
but
I would just say that
you understand what they're talking about well enough to make that distinction.
I doubt that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I would just say to act as if you don't pay much attention around here, because plenty of people criticize Jordan Peterson and Jonathan Peugeot.
Yeah, good.
You don't listen.
That's good.
But the point is, but the point is like no one's gonna get things perfectly. I think that also if you would listen to someone like Jordan Peterson, I think he brings a great deal of humility. And you can even see him I went to go see him live. He's thinking these things out loud, and what he really invites you into is his thinking process. I think a lot what that's kind of what Luke does on his channel. Like, I'm thinking about things this way. He's trying to think out loud. I think that's what PVK does so well, right? He's trying to talk about things. He likes to get it out there. He keeps saying, I love to then to get the feedback, the good and the bad, so he can ruminate it on a process on it. We're all in this on this journey together. But where I would push back is like there never is going to be an expert who has everything right. Like this because you mentioned this. The true science is the hypothesis is always open, right? Like true scientific theory is, and so even the best scientists who figured out some things that let's even go with Einstein or whatever, right? They figured out some things that they figured out how something worked pretty amazingly. But the same way with Galileo, that where all of a sudden you find some things that seem to be true, and then someone has a new revelation, and then it's not all it's all it doesn't make everything he said untrue. It's just that it's nested within a larger truth or whatever that is. And so I do think though we can look at people, and I guess what I try to do is, and maybe this is just the way I'm wired, and it goes back to when I said I wanted to go see if it worked by going to try this Orthodox practices and stuff, is that take whatever people tell you and try to put it in practice in your own life. Like you can test these things in your own personal experience and try to live these things and see as if you can actually get tangible experiences and results. There is a bit of so in some way the practices, there is a bit of empiricism in my practices, like Jeremy, so fasting, I've learned all these amazing things about fasting I never would have known until I actually started to fast. Like, and one of the things I came to find out is that I don't like to eat before I do my morning prayer time anymore, because there's a radical difference in terms of the, I will use terms like effectiveness of what that does to me in my prayer life. Like, that's a weird thing. I wouldn't have known until I actually practiced it and tried it, right? And so I think we have to pick people. We have to get a map of the world. We have to pick a direction to live and move and have our being. And we move down and you get into action, and then you'll course correct. Like, more is going to be revealed. You're going to learn things, and you know, you can't quantify love. You can't quantify grief. Like, the things that are the most important things in our life, the things that will flash in front of us, you know, if our life flashes in front of us, you hear people talk about that. It's not going to be measurements and this, that, the other. It's going to be these more important aspects of meaning, and so on and so forth. So,
well, and I want to, I think it's important for me to clarify what I mean by fractal, because I'm not just using it as a magic catch-all word. So a fractal is like, an example are your blood vessels, and I'm not going to give you the accurate like fractal that explains blood vessels, but it will illustrate my point. You have a fractal that determines how big your blood vessels are, and it is basically like for every when the blood vessel becomes the length of 7 diameters of your blood vessel split, and it bifurcates down, and it bifurcates down. The fractal, if you say, how long is your blood vessel, I will tell you, well, every 7 times every 7 lengths of the diameter it splits. And you're saying, well, does God know how long it is? And I'm saying he knows that every 7 lengths of the blood vessel it splits. It is a fractal, and that is the answer. So what I'm saying is that fractals are not numeric answers to an algebraic construction. Fractals are the function that generates what we see. The fractal is what generates a tree branching out. We see the manifestation of, well,
actually the genetics
equation, but the truth is the fractal, not the tree. The tree is also true, but the fractal is more true because it generates the tree.
I think you're reifying the term fractal. That what generates the tree is the tree's genetics and the tree's environment.
Right, but it follows a fractal pattern. It follows a fractal pattern. It follows a fractal pattern. The pattern is real, and the genetics respond in a fractal way that generates out in scale. It scales out. Fractal just means scaleless. It means that at no matter what scale I look at. So if I look at the veins of the leaf, it's going to match the same pattern. It's going to match that same 7 lengths, 7 diameters, and then it bifurcates. As if I look at in the trunk of the tree or in the roots of the tree. That's what makes it fractal, is that it doesn't matter at what scale I look at, that pattern still is there.
Yeah. So yeah, you could say, well, a brain tumor grows in somebody's head fractally. It's
sure.
So I don't really understand how that gets you to Jesus. There's a fractal, therefore Jesus, or the Bible is mystical or something. I don't understand that at all.
Okay, I'm sorry. I don't mean to get lost in the weeds. What I'm trying to say is that there are times where it feels like you're trying to squeeze certain questions into an empirical box when there's not an empirical answer, and the answer is these are fractal patterns that are revealed. When you're asking me, is Adam a historical person, I will say yes, and he's every person, because the word Adam means man. It's pointing us at a pattern of how people come into existence, and then how they interact with God, and what we can do to get back into paradise. It's revealing a pattern. And whether it happened to one individual 10,000 years ago or 1,000,000 years ago doesn't matter as much as me seeing myself in the pattern and interacting with the world in such a way that is reflected in the pattern. That's what brings meaning to my life. What brings meaning to my life is seeing the pattern of Schindler's List as a meaningful pattern in the world of self-sacrifice for helping other people, rather than, did this factually happen, and was Schindler, did he actually get 6,000 Jews or 6,500 Jews? It doesn't, it's revealing a pattern.
Well,
and the patterns, and here's where I think the patterns are important. Let me just say this. So when I talked about like actually, I mentioned, like, you see these patterns when you go through the fourth and fifth step in AA, right? So, like, your story, Jeremy, and then your story, Michael, like, what happened is Michael, when he was listening to people basically describe how they thought and like how, their life and these things, he was able to see the pattern they were describing, and he resonated with that pattern deeply in himself, right? I think, Jeremy, you were talking about how you could take things into your own life. And I think the pattern of the 12 steps we'll talk about, there's nothing like one alcoholic talking to another, because there's just certain patterns of behavior and thinking and feeling that seems to be universally existent between all of us, right? And so
BBK's on now, so I don't know if you want to wrap it up or whatever, but I'm going to go over there. So,
all right, thanks. See ya. So again, so I get where you're coming from, T-Grog, and so what'll happen is, I just think individually we have to, if we're open to it, we'll see these things, we'll resonate with them, and then when we start to apply them and put some things into action with some willingness and some openness, a number of us would just say our experience, strength, and hope is that we came to an understanding and a reality that God then becomes a reality. And so, and again, now I totally understand, like, if you haven't, because.
So it's kind of a Gnosticism. It's like a Gnostic enlightenment that you either have it or you don't have it.
No, I would say if the scriptures are a pattern and they're revealing patterns, then Christ is the highest revelation of the highest pattern. And when you begin to try to behave the way Christ behaved in your life, you move closer to that pattern, and you find that it's a life-giving pattern. And your life has more meaning. It becomes more full of love, more full of mercy, more full of forgiveness. It's extremely difficult to sacrifice the things that you think are important for those around you. But any father has that experience. Any father knows, on a smaller level, on a smaller scale, on a fractal scale, a father knows what it's like to do what Christ did. It is the act of sacrificing yourself for those you love, right? That's where it becomes real. That's where it is real. It's not empirical. It's real in that I'm acting out the pattern of Christ of trying to be humble, trying to submit my own will to the benefit of my family, and sacrificing for them in order to show my love for them, and in order to experience that love as I'm showing it. I don't do it for the benefit of what comes back to me, but there are things that come back to me, and I'm grateful for it.
That's what I would have a fundamental disagree with you. I find the person of Jesus in the Gospels to be a very mixed bag. He's kind of a dick. He says all sorts of crazy things that don't make any sense.
I agree with you.
So the idea of living in the pattern of Jesus or something like that, give all you have to the poor, do all this other crazy stuff, don't save money. Fox, he takes care of the lilies of the field and the birds in the air. These are clearly ridiculous. Okay. So I don't see Jesus as any great, he said some nice things, but those things can be found other places, like in Greco-Roman writings and in the Old Testament. But he says a lot of crazy stuff too.
I agree
bring my enemies who wouldn't have me rule over them and kill them in front of me. So there's all this. It's like Jesus is a pattern. All this. They don't even read what Jesus said. I mean, but if you really think about what he's saying,
you can't say that about us. You can't say that about us.
Dumb.
You can't say that about me. You can't say that I haven't spent 40 years in that.
No, but I'm saying most people, there's these grand.
So you're talking to us. You're talking to us. We're sharing our.
I've read the Gospels dozens, if not hundreds of times.
Yeah. So
it's not that I'm unfamiliar with what he's saying.
What great teachings of Jesus are not just common knowledge of.
They're common
human
knowledge
beings.
now because you live in a Christian culture.
Um,
They're not common knowledge.
well,
Read about the Romans. They were not common knowledge until Christ.
yeah.
Now they're common
I
knowledge
would just
because you
say
live in a
this.
Protestant Christian culture.
So when Jesus says on the Sermon on the Mount, you know, don't worry about the future. Don't save up possessions because your inheritance is in heaven. I'm paraphrasing. I know that. That's bad advice. It's stupid. And
Right.
I don't. Yeah. So right. Okay.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I'm not
it's
disagreeing with
stupid.
you. Your rational mind goes, this doesn't make sense.
Yeah, because
And when you're 8 years old and your dad says clean up your room, your rational mind says it doesn't make sense. That doesn't mean it's not real or true.
I would say there's a difference between cleaning your room, which I could explain to my children. I could say, look, you clean your room because
Okay, it's a simplistic example. Please don't pick apart my example. I think you understand what I'm saying.
But the idea of, well, what I would hypothesize, I think this makes the most sense according to biblical data, is Jesus expected the world to end. So it doesn't make any difference what you save up for anything, because the kingdom of God is coming and it's going to come soon, very soon. So yeah, it makes sense but that didn't happen.
But the reality is the kingdom does come for very soon for all of us because we're gonna die, right? So the fact of the matter is that's layered in. But I would say, like, so for example, the way Jonathan, and people don't do it, but he talks about it's great because he uses simple language. Is he's like, yeah, you can pursue and think that all this stuff, like just pursuing getting a lot of stuff in like somehow that's going to make you happy. That's the paradigm now. Be successful, get stuff, and somehow your life is going to be fulfilled. Is like that people did that, and they're like, we're one of the richest countries in the history of histories right now, where people live extraordinarily. Even our poor folks, in terms of things work would be there. But I think ultimately it does seem like, for example, when it says the cross is foolishness to this world, like the fact that ultimately what's just stunning to me, I was talking to my wife about this the other night, is like you gain your life by losing your life in service to others. That's a radical way to think about living, but that's actually the thing that makes you most fulfilled. And we can look at that in our relationships. For example, sacrificing for your children, and that pattern, whatever you want to call it, is the way to live. And I think the most beautiful thing, like I think the thing about Christ, this is so antithetical and so anti to this world, is that it's the juxtaposition of what's happening on the cross. Is as the world is murdering him, he is saying, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do.
If that's
like
what
the
he
love
said.
your enemies, the love your enemies thing, and the way that you can get into a true unity and love and sacrifice towards your fellow man, human being, is incredible. Like that is absolutely incredible. And if you spend any time thinking about what the world was like before Christ in terms of treatment of women, children, others, everything else, and what he upended to bring dignity to every human being, is incredible. Now, we live in it now, so it doesn't seem so weird to us, but he did Christ, the person of Christ, who even the atheist New Testament scholars, they do not dispute that he lived. They do not dispute that the things he said, given how quickly everything was written down, that those things were said. Actually, also New Testament atheist scholars, like at some of the higher academia, they don't even disagree that the disciples, they must have witnessed something that seemed like a resurrection event to them, because they all went to go die Braveheart deaths, right? So even when you get into New Testament scholarship, even when you would have atheist or agnostic scholars, like none of that is even really in dispute anymore. And so and again, would you tell me, like the sayings of Jesus? You mentioned the Sermon on the Mount, like when he talks about to pray for your enemies and bless those who persecute you. That sounds insane. Like, I don't naturally do that at all. I want revenge on my enemies, and I want them to be punished forever, you know? When he talks to you about that, you even like anger with your brother, like before you come to me, go be reconciled with your brother, like all of these. And if you even lust after, you know, it's not just not committing adultery. Like if you have lust in your heart, like these levels that he raised, that he disclosed, like that does seem crazy.
Ethics. In other words, the thinking about an act is equivalent to the act. That's
because
insane.
it's about it. But if you've been in marriage, and you can think about yourself, and you know, when you truly love your wife and you think about what that means to her in your relationship and everything else, and if you actually get to the bottom of it, and if you think about that ideal, and if you think about, if I'm careful to not be lusting after every beautiful woman that walks past me, and if I, you know, porn or all those other sorts of things, like if you actually start to live that out, that actually makes your relationship better with your wife. Like that's really good practical advice. Now, everything is, you're not going to get zapped into hell if you're not living to the ideal. That's not it. But to put the highest ideal out, like I don't expect, particularly when I think about my sons raising them, I don't expect them to live up to the highest ideal, but I damn sure hope they try and shoot for it. What's the point of life if you're not trying to live the highest ideal?
Yeah, well, getting back to Jesus's teachings, I think that, and you know, some of the, I mean, you said a lot of things there. We don't know what happened to the disciples. We don't know, you know, even the Apostle Paul. The amount of information we have about him, which is from his epistles and Acts, you could put on the back of a postcard. We don't know anything about these people, or what happened to them. These are legends. They hundreds of years later. I mean,
you can't say no,
they don't make any. They're just
these things have textual documentation even outside of biblical context. Like to say that these people didn't live and have these stories, because in fact in antiquity,
I said we didn't know anything about them. That's what
the time in which we see these texts showing up are very quickly to the events. Like, I mean, if you want to take a look about historical authenticity, like you look at things like Plato or whatever, like 1,000 years later is the earliest manuscript, and yet you would be more than happy to kind of accept.
Yeah, but my eternal destiny does not depend upon believing in Plato. Okay.
But I'm just pointing out that that's a very surface level kind of argument against that I don't think holds water. But here's what I want to make sure I make this very clear, Pete Rob.
Sure.
I'm not saying I think some of those critiques just don't hold water. I 100% out of freedom understand and respect that people have issues and problems and real hurdles to overcome with respect to believing in Christ, and we're all on our journey, and you know, but we're just sharing our experience, strength, and hope. We're experiencing our realities, and all we can do is tell our story. Yeah, all we can do is tell our stories. But I do respect that you're on your journey and you have those things. But you know, some of these.
I could be talking to two Mormons here right now. I mean, they say the same thing.
I used to be. My name's Elder.
You know, so yeah, I mean, sure, any religious person is going to say, yeah, it's a journey, and we're on this journey, and we found the truth, and you know, it's too bad, Grogan, you're too left-brained, and you got all these defects. There's something wrong with you. I understand. I used to believe that shit. Okay, I used to buy all that crap. Except I would say you're totally depraved.
To say they're all the same that's also not. If you go to the end of it, are there similarities? Yes, but there are marked differences. And I would say to anyone, and that's it. It's like, okay, if you want to go practice Buddhism, go to the end of it. Like, I mean, seriously, like I have enough faith for myself. It's like we all have to go on our own journeys, and you know, some people may get to the end of it, some people not. Like some people get to the end of it and they're like, wait a minute, this isn't it. how are you going to know it unless you actually live into it and practice it, right? You
Well,
can stand
yeah,
on the
but there's
outside, but to say that, but this Buddhism does not make the same claims as Christianity, and
well, you could
and
say
and
it
even
symbolically makes the same claims as Christianity. It's a pattern, see, that emerges fully in
potentially, but
Buddhism.
the
See,
incarnation, what's really different is the incarnation of like that's why the incarnation for me, Jeremy, becomes so important, and a lot of people do that. It's like no one's like that. The actual
so is that
incarnation of
literal
Christ
or is that
is
just a symbol? The incarnation, literal or
Well,
symbol?
I'm not
Well,
We
Gnostic.
don't know. We don't know.
Christ ate fish. Christ has a mother. Christ cried.
yeah,
Christ slept. I'm not a
Christ lived.
Gnostic.
He's.
Christ
But
was a
I
man.
absolutely believe that
but
he's a
Adam
God-man.
spoke to God. Adam spoke to God. He walked in the garden with with God. They talked. Eve talked to the snake. But they're not real people. But Jesus is a real person, right?
No, Jeremy
Adam
said
is
it's
a real
both.
person. I said both.
And
I
Jeremy
didn't
said
say
both.
either. I didn't say only pattern. I said both.
Yeah.
Schindler was a real person, and the movie Schindler's List is a real
It's a
movie
story about a
with a
real
pattern
person, which may
revealing
be
the
true
story
or
of
not.
Schindler in a compressed way.
Yeah,
And Mary was a real person, and Jesus was a real person, and the apostles were real persons who lived, and they lived and said and did the things that they said that they, that stuff is like, yeah. That's
So
one
could
of the things
Jesus
that
be like Schindler? In other
What?
words, Jesus could be like Schindler. There was a real person, and then people made up stories about him, right?
Did people make up stories about Schindler?
Well, you said the movie is a representation of.
It's a compression of his
It's a
story. I mean, John says
well,
if
it
we
may
wrote
not be.
everything that Jesus said, the world couldn't contain the books.
Yeah, well,
It's a
that's a
compression.
hyperbolic thing to say, right?
No, it's
That's
the
kind of an
truth.
outrageous thing to say.
He's talking about the infinite facts. Infinite facts are not useful. The infinite details of your life are not meaningful. No one will listen. But if you tell me a 10-minute narrative about the course of your life, then I know a lot more about you than I did 10 minutes ago. But we don't have time for you to tell me every moment of every day of your life, and it wouldn't be helpful.
Yeah, I
don't remember even that. We only remember a narrative.
This is the difference, that I see the New Testament as a collection of stories, letters written by people who we know nothing about, and who wrote for motives we don't understand, and which may have been edited, redacted, rewritten in various ways. And to me, that's not good evidence. It's just not.
There we go. Jeremy, I'm gonna have to wrap this up here.
That's fine, and I got to go too. But that falls back to the primacy of empirical evidence, right? There's other forms of evidence besides empiricism, right? The historical view is not the only view of history, right? The historical critical view is not the only meaningful way to look at history. It's not the only helpful way. It's not even a very helpful way in some regards. It can be very unhelpful. It can be a distraction from actually being able to affect how you live your life, right? Like if I can deconstruct what Jesus said because I don't know exactly if that's word for word what he said, then all of a sudden I don't have to even look at it as a possibility. I could just go, well, it doesn't mean anything because I don't know if that's exactly what he said. Well, of course you don't. He spoke it in Greek 2,000 years ago. Like we can't completely relate to the context. Yeah, we can't relate to the context that he spoke it in.
That's a big problem.
No, it's not the problem. I can't relate to the context that Newton made his discoveries in order for those discoveries to be useful. Newton was an alchemist. I can't relate to that culture. So I don't know anything about Newton. I don't know anything about where he was born. So why should I trust the second law of nature?
Yeah, I don't. Just because Newton's laws hold whether he was an alchemist, a schizophrenic, paranoid.
But I don't know Newton. I can't know that for sure. I can't know that F equals ma if I don't know exactly what Newton had for breakfast on the third day of his 33rd year.
Nobody said that.
I'm saying this it's a hand waving. It's a hand waving at something that feels very uncomfortable for you. It's your cognitive dissonance
but
kicking in.
Jesus is more important than Newton, right?
Yeah, undoubtedly.
Isn't Jesus what Jesus said more important than Newton?
Yes.
Who do we have more evidence for, Newton or Jesus?
It depends on what you mean by evidence.
We know where Jesus
lived?
buried, right?
Do you think Jesus lived?
I would say, I would go along with like somebody like Richard Miller, who's an actual Bible scholar, not Jordan Peterson or somebody like that. I would say that either Jesus was completely a myth or everything we know about him is a myth. It's so difficult.
Now, what do you mean by myth?
Well, that if you had a video camera and you're following Jesus around and the photons reflecting off of him showed him healing a leper, that is not what happened. So.
Okay. I think actually that was very illuminating me, Tigran, because actually what you just said there, even atheist New Testament scholars would reject that entirely. They do not reject it because other outsides. I'm talking.
Well, I'm not, like I said, I'm not an expert scholar, okay, but I'm just saying that it's so unclear and these documents are so opaque.
Really, the only question that I think is left, and this is the only question that I think that anyone can intellectually honestly say, is the question that we're left. It's not that he certainly lived and he certainly was crucified. That's outside text. Certainly, Josephus and others make that. There's clearly that happened. The question is that the people are left with is the resurrection. That's the question, right? That's the crux. It's not that you certainly can't dispute that he lived when he lived and he was crucified when he was crucified. People were capturing these stories immediately in his lifetime and writing them down at the time that people couldn't dispute those things. All those things happened. Now,
people wrote the Gospels.
I grant you this. I grant you this. The question is, and this is, I think this is the crux of the matter. And I think this is where you have good, honest debate that happens again amongst agnostic or atheist New Testament scholars. They understand the question that we're talking about here is was Jesus resurrected? That's where the rubber hits the road in terms of honest historicity as it relates to Christ. That is the quote unquote open question. Now, again, I think what you'll find is a lot of New Testament scholars have come back to the point that they would say clearly the disciples believed it because of how they lived and the historical text and everything. Clearly they believed it, but they might say, they will probably give the argument of they must have been hallucinating something, or there was some phenomena they experienced, but that wasn't really Christ resurrected. And then, okay, it's like that's a legitimate debate that people who are honest about the topic could have a debate about.
Lance, can you name one disciple who wrote in their own name who said they saw Jesus resurrected after he died? One disciple in their own name. John's gospel, he doesn't say, I'm John, I wrote this gospel. That doesn't say that anywhere in the.
Well, first off, when we talk about.
Nobody knows who wrote John's gospel. Nobody.
Well, first of all, you asked me a question, that's the one there, because we know that John lived. We know that Mary went to go live with John. Jesus said that on the cross. Why wasn't John martyred? Listen, we have disciples. John also had disciples, and as he went and he moved, he clearly discipled people. We have their writings in the historicity of these people right closely discipled to him that we know are real human beings that were discipled and were taught by John. And so we have a clear lineage, like that's not even in dispute. If you would be willing to look at that, you would do that. Now, to be like when you want to talk about books of antiquity and so on and so forth, whether something was penned in someone's name or their followers or those folks who, very much in antiquity, when you look at that, like that's not a way to discredit. That's not a way to discredit writings attributed to teachers or so on and so forth as we would look through antiquity. So to make that argument or that claim, to me, that holds no water in terms of disputing whether or not that stuff was said. What we do have is we do have historical fragments and pieces of epistles and certain letters and writings as it relates to that very early on. Like we're starting to see this within the first century when people were living. And so John lived the longest, but he lived the longest. And it's very obvious. I mean, John wasn't martyred because his job was to take care of the Theotokos, the mother of God. I mean, all this stuff becomes, it just makes perfect sense.
Well, it's a story.
We have this lineage.
Yeah,
it's not
it's been harmonized. The only person who says they saw Jesus who puts their name to something is Paul, and he saw Jesus in a vision. Okay, so
John,
that's it.
So,
there is nobody else.
Paul, we've got John.
John's gospel is not.
So what you'll find in the synoptic gospels, and what you'll find is John. Why did they become the gospels? Because there were lots of different people that were clearly writing things, and even though the apocrypha.
That's an interesting question.
The one thing that makes the Gospels consistent is they all talk about the crucifixion of Christ, because it's Christ crucified and his resurrection, which is the gospel. So anyway, I've got to go. So I've got to go now. But anyway, thanks for coming on, Jeremy.
It's been a pleasure. Really, T-Grog, it's been a pleasure to talk to you. I've enjoyed it. Thanks. Have a good one. See ya.